Hi everyone, welcome to In Deep Geek Live. Today we are looking at the second age of Middle-earth. And I've got someone with me who I really enjoy his channel, I have to say. I'm trying my best to be introducing you to as many different content creators in there. So, could you please welcome Matt from the Dork Lords?
Hi everybody! It is a pleasure to be on this show. Thank you so much, Robert, for having me on. I was following your channel years ago with your Game of Thrones content, I remember.
Oh, wow.
Just fantastic stuff. But yes, an honor to be here.
Well, the pleasure is all mine. You will find links down in the description. I'm sure my moderators will also be doing a fantastic job of giving links in the live chat as well. Hang on, sorry, I just got a little bit of reverb on my own. The technology never works for me first time, but here we go. So we're going to talk about the second age in just a moment, and if you're just here to be listening to this, us talk about the second age, you might want to skip forward about 5 minutes if you're not here watching live, because I got a super chat just before we went on air from Mara Lee. Hi there, Mara. I see you're in the chat. Just saying, just a show of love, appreciation, and support for all the fabulous content. How was the world premiere of The Wheel of Time?
Yeah. I'm excited to hear this too.
Good. Looking forward to hearing about your experience there, and if you will be making content once the show finally airs. Well, yes. So this is the sort of the big news in terms of what's happening in the sort of the wider world of fantasy TV shows. Is tomorrow The Wheel of Time is launching, and it's going to be the first 3 episodes are all going to drop at the same time. It's going to be on Amazon Prime, and then they'll be released 1 episode a week for the next, I don't know, 6 weeks or whatever it is. I think there's 8 episodes in season 1. And I was lucky enough to be at the premiere of this earlier this week. Big screen, the cast, the crew were there, and it was a fantastic event. I will happily give you my initial reaction to this, particularly if you're new to the world of The Wheel of Time. The Wheel of Time is a massive book series. Robert Jordan wrote it. It's 14 books long, plus a prequel book. The last 3, he unfortunately died before finishing it. The last
Tragic.
3 were, and it was Brandon Sanderson finished them off. And this has now been adapted for the screen by Amazon. This is big budget. This is a lot of money has been thrown at it. And I think that this is probably the first thing I would say, just as a reflection on it. Watching it, you can tell a lot of money's gone into it. The magic has rarely looked so good in kind of fantasy TV shows. It's really good. I'd also say you can tell that the people adapting it did love the source material. They really put a lot of thought into it. They had to contract it down. As I say, massive book series, trying to fit it into the TV show. It will go, if you're a fan of the books, you will think it's going at quite a fast pace. By the end of episode 2, we were nearly halfway through the first book. So it's really quite quick. And they added in a few extra scenes, which I quite liked, the extra scenes they added in, to be honest. But there's also a few different bits of lore changes that are there, which perhaps superfans might get a little bit picky about. But overall, I enjoyed it. It looked good. It was a really, I think, faithful in spirit adaptation of the books. And if you like high fantasy TV shows, then I think you will like this. But Matt, we just briefly talked about this before we went on air. You've read the books, which is an achievement in and of itself.
I did not read the prequel. I've read the 14 books, and I read them pretty much, in real time. Like I was one of those, like, they used to have a thing, Robert, called bookstores, and what you do is you go to this building. And then you'd walk to the sci-fi fantasy section, and you'd see what your favorite authors had put out lately. So back in what was that, the late 90s, early aughts, I was, Michael Moorcock, the Elric saga. I was all about that. Terry Pratchett, Discworld, through him. Then with Good Omens, Neil Gaiman, and Robert Jordan. And so I was in on the series. I will say though, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the series in that I think this personally, and I get it, everybody's got their own perfectly acceptable thoughts about it. For me, I thought the series kind of peaked around book 6. I'm not going to give spoilers, but there's this big battle sequence that happens in book 6, and I remember having a visceral reaction reading it, like, whoa, like in a good way, like, whoa, when you got this sense of like, this is why the powers that be in this world fear magic users that aren't controlled. And anyway, but it was like this really powerful thing. And then after that, I felt like the story kept growing and not like there wasn't a plan almost. I kept waiting for a plot thread to close and they never closed and they just kept going. But I read every word of 14 books. So obviously it had something going for it. And your description about the magic being so vividly displayed is great to hear to me, because that is one of the things that really drew me to these books is the magic system. If there's not a role-playing game that hasn't taken up the magic system and tried to turn it into a role-playing thing, they should. It probably is. But just the way it's used with the different threads and the weaves and seeing the weaves of magic and people, taking these focuses and creatively combining them into these spells like that. I could just watch that for days. That would be awesome to witness in a TV show. So thumbs up to that if that's the way that's going.
Excellent. Well, I think you can take this as a positive review from me, and not having watched it yet, positive review from Matt. It's not in my view. I love Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, and I love Tolkien. Personally, I would say that you get sort of Robert Jordan and The Wheel of Time. I also really enjoy it. I don't personally hold it up at the same quite level. I would agree, and even interestingly, Rafe Judkins, who's the showrunner, even he accepts that somewhere around half, 2/3 of the way through, then it does slow down. The pace does kind of. I think there's one, The Crossroads at Twilight, where I think it's like an entire massive book that just covers like maybe an hour. At least that's what it felt like, because there are so many strands that all have to come together. But that said, it's really good fun. Great world, great characterizations, and a really good story. So I think you will enjoy that. So do sort of check it out. It's already being season 2 is already being filmed. So Amazon have made a proper commitment to this. It's not just like we'll try one season and see what
flash in the pan. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so that is The Wheel of Time. That's the big news about what's happening. The other thing, just to flag in case anyone's forgotten, The Witcher season 2 is out in now less than a month's time. So that's the something that I will definitely be covering on this channel. Oh, and for people who are wondering if I'm going to cover The Wheel of Time, tomorrow I have got a video, an introduction to the world of The Wheel of Time, which will be appearing on this channel. I haven't yet decided. I won't be covering it in the same depth I've done seasons on, say, Game of Thrones in the past, but I may well do another couple of videos. Let's just see how that goes.
I think I'll be doing a couple of videos, probably not an episode by episode recap, especially with the way it's being dropped, but I'll be covering some facet of Wheel of Time on the Dork Lords channel as well.
Excellent. And just while we're on that, Matt, just to finish off your introduction, on Dork Lords, you don't just cover Lord of the Rings, you also cover a range of like sci-fi stuff as well, like Foundation and Dune.
Yeah, right now we're covering Foundation. Actually, tomorrow is the season 1 finale of Foundation. It's a TV show based on the Asimov books, which it's got a few different storylines. One of the storylines is, it is some of the best sci-fi that I've seen on TV in recent memory. It's amazing. And actually, it's the storyline that involves Thranduil, Lee Pace. So anyway, it's a brilliant storyline. But yeah, I started the channel with the idea of like just covering subject matter that appeals to me, hence usually in the dorky nature. And along the way, a friend of mine just said, you should you seem to know a lot about the Tolkien Middle-earth world. You should bring that onto your channel. And so I did, and it's easily the most popular content I've got is my Lord of the Rings playlist. And so yeah, I'm all in on Tolkien, and I try to keep it more storytelling based and less academic based to try to, I don't know, it's at the heart of it. There's just some brilliant stories that are so well written that Tolkien composed, and in the Silmarillion sometimes these stories are embedded in these giant stories, and if you can just parse them out, they're just breathtakingly amazing story arcs for these individuals. So I think that's probably where I'm at my best, is taking a character and showing just their story, devoid of all the excess around it.
Excellent, and that's something I certainly value here on this channel. I'm very much into story and character, which is where a lot of these writers they have focused. Some sci-fi is quite ideas focused, but I personally I love the characterizations and character arcs and story. That is what works for me. But let's get to the subject that we've got today, which is the second age of Middle Earth. For those who can think back a month, I had Girl Next Gondor on last time, who I think was in the chat just a moment ago. Hi there, if you're still around, Lexi. But
Lexi was amazing, by the way. Boy,
she was. Her
knowledge base, impressive.
Yes, very, very impressive. A very high bar for us all, it has to be said. So no pressure.
No
so
pressure.
First stage, where we ended the first stage, broadly speaking, is the downfall of the big baddie in Tolkien's world, Morgoth. He's gone, he's in chains, he's out of there. And what I'll do now is I'll give my 5-minute overview of the second age, which after which, Matt, if perhaps you can point out the obvious things that I've missed out and sort of highlight a few things that you think are important before we sort of get into a few of the details. But where we left this off, so Morgoth has gone. The elves have been called back to Valinor, but quite a lot of them decide to stay. Some of them do go back. Some of them are forgiven. The Noldor are forgiven for their rebellious ways, but quite a few of them stay, including people that we know and love, like Galadriel and Círdan and the like. Elrond is an interesting character because he and his twin brother Elros, they are half-elven. They could go, or they're given the choice. Do they wish to live as elves or as men? And they choose different things. Elrond chooses the life of an elf. His brother chooses the life of men. Now, the big shift that happens, there's a lot of sort of geographical changes that go on. Maybe we can talk about that in a moment. But this huge new island continent is created called Numenor, which is given as a reward for the humans who fought on the side of the good guys against Morgoth. They're Edain, they're called. And they are given this new land. And Elros, Elrond's brother, who has chosen the life of a man, is their first king. So they set up this kingdom, and this kingdom, over the course of the next 2,000 years, grows in splendor. It grows in majesty. This is the height of humanity in terms of its technology, in terms of its arts, in terms of everything it can do. The Numenoreans are amazing in every way, we're basically told. They're great shipwrights, they're great builders, they've got the great arts. All is good. However, what we have as a sort of an ongoing situation is they go and reach this kind of pinnacle, and then there's this slow decline in the second half of the second age. So the second age, broadly, there are bits at the beginning and end, which we'll talk about, but broadly speaking is the rise and fall of Numenor. Now, while all this is going on, Numenor is there living its very happy life. We've got Sauron. Sauron was the chief lieutenant of Morgoth, and he sort of nearly gave in and at the end of the first stage, but then decided, you know what, I'm just going to hide.
They let him
and
off
so
the
hid
hook. Yeah.
Exactly. He hid himself away, and then he reappears about halfway through this second age as in disguise as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and he took on a fair visage. This is sexy Sauron. This is a beautiful human with honeyed words, and he comes offering the elves his knowledge and abilities in how to craft rings of power. Gil-galad and Elrond are a little bit suspect, but he finds somebody who will take him in. This is Celebrimbor, who I did a video on actually quite recently, if you're interested in Celebrimbor. And over a long period of time, this is 300-400 years, this is a very slow burn plan on behalf of Sauron.
It's long
he
gone.
spends his time creating these rings of power, and they get increasingly more powerful. Lots of minor rings, then starts to create more powerful ones. Then he sneaks off back to Mordor and he forges the One Ring. We know this bit of background, but this is important that this happens in the Second Age. He forges the One Ring, the idea being that when he wears this One Ring, all the other ring bearers, he can see what they're doing and he can slowly take control over them. And this is his cunning plan to take over Middle-earth, is that he will take control of the people who have all of these rings. However, it doesn't quite go to plan, because the moment he puts on the ring, the elves go, oh, what's happening? They figure out what's going. They've realized what it is. They take off the rings, and Celebrimbor just like goes, well, what do I do with these? He's made 3 completely without any influence of Sauron, which are his masterworks. These are the 3 elven rings which we know about beta. Ask Galadriel what to do. Galadriel basically says, why don't we just pass them off, give them off to other people so that they're not just with you, because Sauron's clearly going to come hunting for these. So he distributes them. But Sauron does then just say, okay, so my cunning plan didn't quite work. I'm just going to go and invade and grab all of these things, which he does. His army comes sweeping across Middle-earth, takes out Eriador, which is where the rings were, kills Celebrimbor. Poor Celebrimbor. He's got a really tragic story.
Yeah. One of those stories we were talking about, the awesome narrative arcs.
Exactly.
Story.
So, but the 3 elven rings, as we call them, have been distributed. They've gone. Sauron can't find them, but he can find the other rings. He then just carries on his war, but the elves and the Numenoreans, who, as we've said, at this point of reaching the height of their power, come in and push him back. And eventually he gets pushed all the way back to Mordor. He does own a whole swathes of land all around a lot of Middle-earth as well. But then he tries to sort of put his ring plan into effect. Let's try again, shall we? Distributes the 9 rings of power, distributes the 7 rings of power to the dwarves. So we've got the 9 going to the humans, 7 going to the dwarves. I'm sure we'll cover who they might have gone to and what impact they'll have. But that's all gone out. Now we can kind of fast forward a little bit, because we get to Numenor descending over a very long period of time into hating the elves, hating the ban of the Valar, which is saying, well, you can't come across to the Undying Lands, you can't live forever. All of these things the elves have got, you can't have them. They get really kind of angry about this. But they get this great lust for power. Sauron is out there declaring himself king of men, king of kings. So they send an army out, and Sauron says, all right, I'll be your prisoner. I give up. And it's just that seems a little suspect.
Right, exactly. Why is that so easy? All right, sure. No follow-up questions.
We have a follow-up question from our show. So I had a super chat asking this exact thing. So we will get to that in just one second. But so Sauron goes on, and long story short, he corrupts the minds of the Numenoreans, persuades them to head off to attack, basically to try and claim the Undying Lands for themselves, claim what they think is their right. Eru Ilúvatar's having none of it. They all get destroyed. Numenor itself gets washed away, plunged down into the sea. A few plucky heroes manage to escape, though. The people, the faithful, those who have not gone down this path with the majority of the Numenoreans, but have stayed firm, they escape over to Middle-earth. This is Elendil with his 2 sons. They set up kingdoms as they were Numenoreans, and we think of them now as the Dunedain, that line. They set up their kingdoms, and then there's this final battle with Sauron. Sauron then comes out and decides he's quite angry. Sauron, well, his body was destroyed in the end of Numenor. His spirit lived on. He's got himself a new body, and now he's just going to try and attack everyone that he hates. Starts to win, but then the last alliance of elves and men stop him, and we get that scene that we know from the very beginning of the Lord of the Rings movies.
Montage.
Exactly, and we get the cutting the ring off of the finger, Isildur, and all of that. We know it so well. And that is the end of the Second Age, basically, when the downfall of Sauron. So this is the narrative arc. It's the rise and fall of Numenor, and also Sauron with his cunning plan with the rings and what's going on with that. So that's the overview. Matt, what did I miss, and what would you like to highlight?
You missed absolutely nothing. Sorry, no, actually, that was actually really, really well done. Yes, I mean, those are the major beats. A lot of the story is told in some ways through the eyes of Sauron almost. It follows him, right? He's forging the rings, then he's going to Numenor. We follow him on Numenor. He comes back to Middle-earth. We follow him back to Middle-earth. It's a little villain-centric in that way. But yeah, no, there are a few different storylines that I find really interesting from Numenor. I mean, we've got several kings and queens, and some of those stories, in particular, the Mariner's Wife story. So this is from Unfinished Tales. It's Aldarion and Arendis, and this is this. I'll call it a love story. It's they fall out of love, but it's
love is involved.
Love is involved, and that is one of the ways that it becomes a very unique story in terms of Tolkien's mythology. Most of Tolkien's mythology is, mythic. We're seeing these heroes doing these amazingly brave things, or dastardly deeds being done, choices that are going to affect the outcome of Middle-earth. And this story, while it does have big ramifications, it feels more grounded. It feels like two people, they both make mistakes. It's a relationship that fails. And I don't know, it's one of the more kind of simple stories that Tolkien tells, and it's really beautifully written. I love that story, and it's so tragic. I mean, I'll say that it's she ends up drowning. Implication being she committed suicide, and they have a daughter that feels neglected and abandoned, almost rightfully so, because her dad's always at sea. And she becomes queen. We're talking Taran Calame. And because Aldarion, his love of the sea was a love of exploration and was interpreted also as a love of the elves of Middle-earth. He's the one that makes this kind of, in some ways, the beginning of the last alliance. The alliance between elves and men begins with Aldarion and Gil-galad. And so this daughter who's been rejected by her dad, she feels that way. I think she sees the source of the rejection. He prefers elves to me. You know what? I'm cutting off ties. I'm done with elves. And so her rule becomes, it's kind of the beginning of the, not interfering with Middle-earth. We're going to leave elves to themselves. And I feel like part of that is because she is in this dysfunctional family. She grew up with a family that's separated, and she was abandoned by her dad. And that's her outlook on life. And so anyway, so it's a simple story that then has these branches out to real world consequences. I really like that story too.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things about the Second Age is that whereas in the First Age we get quite a lot of detail, the Second Age there are huge swathes of time when there's not much.
Yep,
there's
like
big
fast
gaps.
forward. Yeah.
What was Sauron doing for the first over a millennia of the Second Age? Who knows?
In hiding, generally.
Exactly.
Right.
We do not know. But we do get a few of these random stories. So the Mariner's Wife is that it's in Unfinished Tales, the Book of Unfinished Tales, which is one of, incidentally, if you want to find out about the Second Age, some in the Silmarillion, some in the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, and the Unfinished Tales has also got some good bits of information there. So this story of the Mariner's Wife, as I say, it's tragic. It's really quite sad, but it's very personal in a way that a lot of Tolkien stories aren't. They aren't that detailed about the personal interrelationships.
Right.
I did have a question. Sort of, this was reflective rambling. Thank you so much. Picking up a question for Javier Montesca. Completely mangled the name. I apologize. Saying, what is your favorite Second Age kingdom? So, what would you put down as your favorite Second Age kingdom?
Oh wow, I think I'm gonna go with Eregion, because here's this kingdom that gets established by kind of a combination of Galadriel, Celeborn, and Celebrimbor. They realize, hey, the dwarves have mithril, and we might like to have a mutually beneficial society there, where they give us, we take their goods and make really cool goods in return. And so we have this not unique but fairly unique relationship between dwarves and elves that comes between Eregion and Moria, and there's this really interesting subplot that gets. I don't know if they're going to cover this in the Amazon series or not. I hope they do. But so Anatar shows up. Hey, I'm Anatar, not Sauron. Trust me. Celebrimbor kind of does I trust you implicitly because you're helping me craft really good stuff. And Anatar convinces Celebrimbor to revolt. So Galadriel and Celeborn are really the leaders of Eregion for quite a while. But at some point, the word revolt is used by Tolkien, but I think it's like a bloodless coup. I don't think it's actually like violence. But basically, he overthrows Galadriel, and Galadriel leaves. She ends up going to Lothlorien. Where, interestingly, Celeborn stays. I'm like, how did that work? But anyway, so there's a whole lot of politics going on there. And then, Eregion has this tragic fall. But so many events that are really important to the mythology of Middle-earth happen in Eregion. And so I think that would be my vote for my favorite realm, if you want to call it that, in Second Age.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think I probably would have picked that myself, but I will go with, for me, the early days of Gondor, which is an astonishing time when we have this really kind of wonderful power sharing agreement between two brothers. They've got Osgiliath, the main capital, where they've got two thrones there, and then they've each got their own base sort of to the west and east of that. And they go and create wonders. You go with things like Orthanc, the Tower of Orthanc, which is almost indestructible. How did they make that? Who knows? They get the Argonath, the great two massive stone statues that they create. They're all of these. It's like the last bits of Numenor's glory brought over into Middle Earth, and then technology is lost.
I think even in Minas Ithil, so the tower that Isildur's realm has, I believe it's even got a rotating tower that is still working during the time of the Lord of the Rings. So you're like, well, now that's some good tech. Anyway, but yeah. So they brought some amazing technology over. Agreed. I also do like the symmetry of that, where you've got so Anarion is Minas Anor, which is what later becomes Minas Tirith. But so Minas Anor is like the Tower of the Sun, Minas Ithil, Tower of the Moon, and between them is Osgiliath's Dome of the Stars. And so you've got this. It's almost like the sky is projected across Gondor. It's very poetic. Anyway.
It is the sun, moon, and the stars all there. It's one of my favorites. Laura Estrada saying, "What a treat, two of my favorite Lord of the Rings YouTubers." Thank you, thank you very much for that. I did say we would come back to this question about Sauron just giving up and going over to Numenor.
Oh, okay, sure.
Lyle Hammock had a question saying, "Hello, Robert. Do we know if Sauron took the One Ring to Numenor with him? I can't believe he would risk not having it, even if he was a prisoner in Numenor. What do you think? And do you think he orchestrated his capture?" Well, in the first bit, I'll answer that. I think it's reasonably clear he left the One Ring back in Mordor because when he goes back there, then he takes and puts it on, and his physical body was destroyed in Numenor, so it's just his spirit that went back from Numenor.
I'll say this, you're certainly probably right, but there is in a letter that Tolkien wrote. So letters are like, they're not canon. I don't know what those letters are, frankly. Yeah. But in a letter, Tolkien did write a little line that mentioned that he thought that when destroyed, Sauron's spirit form could have taken the ring back with him to Middle-earth from Numenor. So he at least establishes that possibility that happened, whether or not he says, definitively that's a thing. But anyway.
And which actually, incidentally, for those who are unaware of Tolkien's writing conceit, is probably the best way of saying it, is that he always treats himself, as despite this being his creation, as being almost like a scholar trying to discover things about this world. And so
you could just say yes. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, some people may think that this might have happened, and it's like, is that you saying it did happen, or is that so it's not always 100% clear when he does these things, if he's just trying to create this extra kind of what we might now think of as like a meta narrative,
exactly,
but or whether that was just his slightly clunky Oxfordian way of saying yes. But I
throwing that out there.
Exactly. As I say, my headcanon is he left it back
gotcha.
There, but I think there's certainly the option that he didn't. But this issue of whether he orchestrated his capture, I think perhaps Matt, you set out your thoughts on this. My initial take is I think the Silmarillion is reasonably clear that he did. What's your thought?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think he weighed the odds, saw that this is indeed a stronger army, but could he have ordered his troops to keep fighting? Yes. I think he decided, you know what, it's actually to my best interest to try to corrupt this group from the inside. It was always his idea to focus on Numenor and destroy them from the inside out. And so what better way to do that than to be on Numenor itself to do that? So I think it was his plan to take me in.
Yeah, there's a quote, I can't remember it exactly, in the Silmarillion, where it basically says, and he thought to himself that what he cannot do, he saw the great army there and thought, I can't defeat that, but what I can't do by strength, and I can perhaps do by subtlety or something along those lines. So he was happy to go along with this.
And there's a great quote right after that, I think, in that same passage, where when he's brought to Numenor and he sees their tech, he sees their buildings, like he is instantly just like a jealous rage. Like he is completely like just blown away by the tech and the abilities of the Numenoreans, and he's kind of just angry at the fact that they're so awesome, basically.
Yes, absolutely. Reflective Rambling saying that Mattia Dominique is watching me on Twitch. Wink, wink, nudge. Yes, I'm secretly on Twitch at the moment as well. I'm still just playing with the technology. I'm hoping it's working. So if you are watching me on Twitch, hi there.
I've actually got a Twitch channel that no one's ever on. But it's Dork Lord Prime.
Dork Lord Prime.
Anyway,
nice.
My buddy Theron, who actually does some of the Lord of the Ring film revisitations with me on Dork Lords. We play a Tolkien-inspired role-playing game once a week, and so there you go on Twitch, Dork Lord Prime.
Excellent. So yeah, I'm on. I'm not putting much effort yet into Twitch. I'm just trying to work out how it works. But if you are, if it's easier for you to watch on Twitch, then please do. I had a question from Lar Hammock again. Thank you very much, Lar. Saying, what is your view of the queens of Numenor as rulers? I find them ranging from aloof to bad, and. Why did Anclame marry Helicar if he deceived her? Okay, well, I'll give the overview here for the Second Age lasted 3,319 years, I believe, and most of that Numenor, that's how long Numenor lasted, at least anyway. Most of that, then we get these Numenorean kings, but they lived a long time, the Numenoreans, it has to be said. So we get 25 official monarchs, of which 3 are female. Now, I think I would go, Lyle, very much with your view that they don't tend to come across very well, the female rulers, the queens of Numenor. And Calumet, are you an expert on Calumet and her marriage at all?
I honestly am an expert on the Calumet, but that was who I was just talking about earlier. Yeah. Her upbringing, her dysfunctional family, I think really informed the decisions that she made as a ruler. Yeah, I mean, she does this non-intervention style politics with Middle-earth. And she sets a new precedent for Numenor, takes him in a new direction that gets followed by the rulers that come after. So it's not a good direction, right? You would like, as a reader, you want them to stay united with the elves. Yeah. And when they don't, you're like, oh man, don't do that. That's a bad idea.
So there's the context here. So she's the 7th ruler. Her father was Eldarion. This was the person, the mariner that we were talking about. He's a king. He was the king, and basically he loved sailing. And much as he kind of liked his wife, sailing was much better in his mind. So he just kept on heading out on these extra long missions, just exploring, making friends with the elves. And Tolkien kind of weaves it in. It's never exactly said in these ways, but this was really important in the longer term because it established good connections with the elves. It helped warning everybody about Sauron's rise, that kind of thing. But in terms of Numenor, this was not a good thing. In terms of his marriage, this was definitely not a good thing. And his daughter was brought up basically in isolation by his wife, who was just so annoyed and just said, like, all men are terrible, therefore I'm going to bring up my daughter away from every man in the entire world. And so her life and her rulership did kind of reflect that rather awkward upbringing, it has to be said. And the other queens aren't much better, it has to be said. Now, I don't think this is a particularly sexist thing. Most of the monarchs from that point onwards are pretty bad in their own ways. So it's not that Tolkien was picking out the queens and saying that they were bad and the kings were good.
Plenty of bad kings, yes.
There are lots of bad kings as well. And in fact, the bad kings are worse than the bad queens, would be my general take on it. Let's go to a question from one of my patrons. Let's take ourselves back to the start of Numenor. This is Matthew Hawkins saying, Numenor was populated by the survivors of the 3 houses of the Ardain to arrive in Beleriand, namely Beor, Haleth, and Hador. Did these people settle in separate regions of Numenor, or did they all assimilate from the very beginning? Did you have a chance to sort of look at this, Matt?
I looked at it a bit. I would say one thing right off is that not a whole lot of folks from the second house, the House of Haleth, got pretty decimated by the time of the end of the War of Wrath. And so primarily Numenor is being settled by 2 houses, the first house and the third house, Beor, Hador. I didn't see a lot of distinction in terms of we're going to settle in this region and you settle in that region. And in fact, I did find a little note. One of the other groups that does get to go to Numenor are the Druidine, and almost like a little the 4th house. No, they're the wild men, and actually I think it's in the Mariner's Wife. There's a passage that is written about the Druidine in the house of Aldarion when he's king, and so they're living in Armenelos along with all the other folks. So I get the feeling that generally there isn't a sense of partitioning out. I would say the only mention of that might be the lords of Aduniae. And so these are Aduniae is on the western coast of Numenor, and these are the folks that end up becoming the faithful, essentially. But they're the lords of Adunie, have their own little realm, their own region. They are beholden to the king, but they kind of have their own little separate area, and that's where they congregate. And so that's maybe a bit of a division that I came up with, but otherwise I don't know that it's like, oh, you're from the House of Beor, well, you go over there. You're from the House of Hador, you go over here. I didn't see that personally.
No, and I'm pretty sure that isn't the case. Tolkien definitely doesn't seem to mention that that's the case. By the end, they're just Numenoreans. The only slight distinction is whether you're from the line of Elros or not. Because if you're from the line of Elros, then you've got a little bit of Elvish in you. You've got a little bit of Maya in you, actually, as well, incidentally. But they are very long-lived, and they're also quite often very tall. So that is the sort of the royal line. That's where Aragorn eventually comes from in the end. And because they kind of skipped a potential queen and went to a king instead, that's where Elendil and then his sons come from as well. Right. So that's the line from Elros, which, yes, and if you've never come across this before, this does mean that technically, given that Elros was Elrond's brother, Aragorn marrying Arwen is a sort of a cousin thing in a kind of a very, very 30-something generation.
Right, so many difference. Generations go down.
Exactly. But they are from the same line. But no, there's no, until we get the distinction between the king's men, who are the people who are tending to be anti-elf and anti-Iluvatar, and the faithful, who are pro-elf and pro-Iluvatar. That's the point at which there seemed to be more of a segregation in different parts of the island as to who is where. Until then, there's not really, as far as we can tell. Mm-hmm. Cloaked Juan, thank you very much. Hi there, Cloaked Juan. Picking up for Orin Lalo. Love it when people do this, picking up questions for others. Very kind of you. Oh, wow. How did people survive and leave Beleriand at the end of the First Age to survive into the Second Age? Was the sinking at the end of the War of Wrath slow, or was it more catastrophic? So context here is, as I said, there's a lot of big sort of geography changes that happen. Well, a lot of the time between ages, there's these big geography changes. The Numenor as an island comes up into being, up out of the sea. The best of the Valar Ulmo does that for us, and then the swathes of the map that we sort of knew from the First Age, they get covered in water. So we get a lot of this issue about, how, is there time for people to be moving on? We're not sort of told exactly. Maybe, again, Matt, you've got some... I'm hoping you're going to come out with another random thing from the letters about this one. But it was... Damn it. It was the year 32 of the Second Age before the boats actually set sail with all the Edain over into Numenor, which kind of implies that this was a kind of a slow process of rejigging everyone around. So certainly having had this getting rid of Morgoth kind of thing, and then there was a lot of sort of hanging around, and then Sauron being called, and did he want to do sort of come back over to talk to Manwë himself? That there was a lot of toing and froing. So this wasn't just like click, that's it, all gone. This was a slightly more slow process. But have you got any more sort of details on the geographical changes?
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it in terms of the speed at which the cataclysm happened in that case. One thing to think about, though, is that what we consider in the Third Age, when you think of the quintessential map of Middle Earth, Third Age, and you've got the Grey Havens on the west coast. Well, that was part of Beleriand. It was like the far east inland of Beleriand, and then the western 4/5 fell, disappeared under the waves. So it does suggest that at least there was time for those who wanted to get east. They could get east, and they got to what was now a coastline, and became, the Grey Havens area and Linden and that area. But I would think that a lot lost their lives as well. Like if you weren't quick on the uptake, to travel east, you were probably in some real trouble, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Just very quickly, Keziglu Bay spotted it in the chat saying, what was Glorfindel doing during the Second Age and why didn't he spank Sauron? Great question. Glorfindel died, if you remember, in the First Age. He had a big fighting match against a Balrog. He died, but then was brought back in the Second Age. So he came back. Tolkien did change his mind on the exact timing there, but it was sort of roughly halfway through the Second Age, around the time we think that Sauron was forging the One Ring. He couldn't personally, my take, he couldn't personally spank Sauron, as you so eloquently put it, because Sauron at this stage, in his full power as a Maya, was, even though Glorfindel was mightily powerful, I think that you would have to say that Sauron was still his better. But Glorfindel, although we don't get much kind of match by match breakdown of what he does, he is involved almost certainly in all of these wars that are happening. He ends up in Ladris in Rivendell with Elrond, which very clearly implies to me that he was involved in a lot of those battles, including like the last alliance as well. Let's pick up a question from I missed it. Here we go. From Anonymous, great name, saying, did Anatar pretend to be an elf or a man? I always wonder why Celebrimbor just accepted this supercrafting being without questioning his origin. What do you, I'll go to you first on this one. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think, and this is a great question, I thought about this too, I think he put himself as a Maya. I think he was, he already is a Maya spirit. He's not saying I'm Sauron, but I think he just made up a different persona. Like, look, I'm friendly Maya, Anatar, and I have special powers, Lord of Gifts. I'm really good at crafting. Maybe I'm a servant of Aule, much like our Noldor elves were devotees. And so, yeah, I think he made himself into a Maya spirit that was going to offer this assistance to the Noldor. That's my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds about. It's not said. It's certainly humanoid. I don't think it'll be as a man. I think it would be either an elf or, as you say, something like a Maya. They didn't know, Elrond and the like didn't know, even the wisest didn't know who this was. They just kind of suspected something was a bit off. So yeah, we don't know. As for the sort of the slightly bigger question about why accept this supercrafting being without questioning his origin, well, I think part of the answer is what I said before. This is a very long con from him. He was hanging around for like 4 centuries, and at that point you kind of feel you know someone. So I kind of go easy on them. And Celebrimbor as well, he was just coming into his own. At the risk of sort of spoiling the video I did on him just a week or so ago, if you go through his history, he comes across, he's separated from his mother at presumably a relatively young age. She stayed over in Valinor while his father took him over with him. He disowns his father for his father's actions. All of the rest of his family die. He sets himself, he's probably involved in all of these losing battles against Morgoth. He sets himself up in Nargothrond, that gets destroyed. He sets himself up in Gondolin, that gets destroyed. Everywhere he goes,
being chased.
Exactly. And then later on, obviously, where he goes to Eregion, that gets destroyed. He basically, there's just this huge, he goes from place to place, losing family, losing homes, losing connections, and finally he gets himself set up in a place where he's valued for what he can bring, the skills that he can bring. He was an excellent craftsperson, and finally he was able to sort of create things which could bless the world. And when Anatar was offering the skills of craftsmanship to make the rings, it wasn't a here's some powerful rings for you. It was all, these rings can help bring life and strength and these can help empower people around you, and this can help slow the dying of Middle Earth. These are like things that are really touching the heartstrings of elves, and you see that in the 3 elven rings.
And I feel like there's a huge component too for him, which is I think he's trying to live up to what he imagines is the legacy of his grandfather. Feanor, the most talented craftsman in elven history, created the 3 Silmarils. Oh, wow, this guy. I mean, like, as much as everybody, I'm sure around that time, is probably thinking that guy's a villain, in Celebrimbor's mind, it's like there's probably a sense of, yes, but here was the greatest craftsman of any age. I'm going to try to live up to that legacy with my own 3 inventions. By creating the 3 rings, it's like his callback to his grandfather creating the Silmarils. And so I feel like somebody who comes along who says, I can help you do that, I think there was an extra pull to have this, kind of the legacy of the family. I'm going to become the next greatest craftsman of all time.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting point. Question, Lyle Hammock, again, very kind, very generous today, Lyle, thank you. Saying, I'm curious about religion in Numenor and Middle-earth. I believe I read where Rohan worshipped Rome. Do we know of examples like this in Middle-earth? Also, did the Numenoreans worship any particular Valar, or was it only Eru? Well, I'll pick up on the second one, Matt, if perhaps you can try and think of some examples about sort of worship in Middle-earth more broadly. In terms of Numenor, Tolkien says very clearly that the mountain at the center of Numenor, so if you've not seen, in fact, I think it was the thumbnail I did for this, Numenor's shaped like a starfish, basically. And in the middle of that is you get the main capital city, but also you get this mountain, Meneltana, which is very high and very steep at the top. And it's got this sort of flat top, slightly dipped, and that is the place of worship of Eru and Eru Iluvatar. In terms of what that looks like, it said there's silence there, and everybody going there, they just feel the silence kind of comes upon them, and they don't say anything. Anyone was welcome to sort of go up there and just be in silence. There were great eagles there who were effectively representatives from Manwë. But 3 times a year, the king would go up with the people following him, and he would give thanks and praise to Iluvatar. He would be able to speak, and everybody else remained silent. And that was it. And Tolkien says very clearly, there was, until Sauron came, there was no other temple in all of Numenor. So that is the worship. That is the only worship that they had, and this was to Eru Iluvatar direct. When Sauron came towards the end, he set up this big evil temple.
So disturbing. This is some of the most disturbing writing in Tolkien's lore.
Absolutely. Very visceral, and this is one of the things I'm really looking forward to seeing on the show, assuming we get to see that as well. So it's worship of Melkor, Morgoth. There's sacrifices. There's it's beautiful on the outside, but then starts turning black with all the acrid smoke. There's a huge amount of great symbolism going on there as well. But Matt, is there anything in terms of sort of worship, either Numenor or more broadly, that you'd like to just sort of
I was trying to think
to our attention?
Middle Earth context. One thing I was thinking about is the Stone of Elendil. So we've got the Palantiri. Most of them are connected to each other, and hence the whole, spying on Sauron, he's spying on me. One of the stones, though, the Elendil stone, is disconnected from the rest, and it only looks one direction, west. And so what happens is we get the idea that the elves make these pilgrimages to this stone. It's in the tower on the coast near the Grey Havens, and on certain times of the year, they go up and they can look through the stone. We don't exactly know how this works. My personal theory is perhaps it's connecting to this master stone that's on Tol Eressëa, which is a little island just off the coast of Aman. And from there, apparently they can see, if they go at the right time and all works out, they get to see an image of Varda. So the Varda will like come and basically be seen to those who are willing to make this pilgrimage. And so that is a way that the elves are, staying in touch with those that they revere. Another thing I was thinking of is what we get with Amon Hen. So Amon Hen is that we see it in the films. It's the hillside with the old seat on it that Frodo goes up and he puts the ring on and he's about to be found out by Sauron. And what we get from the books is that, so as part of a set, there's Amon Hen and Amon Law, and there's two hillsides, and they each have their own structure on top, and they're both thrones. And there's an implication that those thrones are actually a callback to Manwë and Varda. They have their own thrones that they sit on, and anyway, there's an allusion to the fact that these sacred sites are sacred because somebody, probably somebody of Numenorean ancestry that came over and made these structures, was doing it out of worship for the Valar. And so that's another little, like a worshiping site.
That's really interesting. I think the other things that I would just sort of throw into the mix, because you get a lot of kind of random bits of worship. We hear that the elves, when they first encountered Orome, they kind of thought this was a god, so they were going worshipping there. The same also with the men the first time around, that there was this huge, they seem to have worshipped Sauron as a god because of the way that he presented himself. And obviously also the dwarves, although Tolkien doesn't go huge amounts into sort of dwarven culture, they have Aula, who is their creator. So whereas we get the children of Iluvatar, elves and humans, their creator is Iluvatar. The dwarves were created by Aula, and so they do seem to have a very personal creator worship going on there with that particular Valar. Britt Logan, thank you so much. It's an incredibly generous super chat. I didn't see if there was any question to go with that. If there is, I'm sure one of my moderators will pick it up and drop it into the chat, and I will answer that. Lyle Hammock, again, thank you very much, saying, what do you think is most important for Amazon to get right for the Second Age in their adaptation in order for it to work? Also, what name would you like for the show? Well, I mean, I think the name's the tough one because it really does depend on exactly what they're going to cover. But I mean, some better brain than mine, I think, must be able to come up with something like Downfall of Numenor, but like cooler sounding than that. It
also depends. That's a great point. We're getting hints lately that it seems like the Downfall of Numenor is more of a focus, whereas originally, the original advertising for that show was, I think, very clearly focusing on the Forging of the Rings. And so, those are two, while they're related, they're two different things. And so it is interesting to know what the focus, if you called it the Downfall of Numenor and then you spent 2 seasons focusing on the Forging of the Rings, it'd be like, oh, that's kind of odd. Conversely, if you did the other way around, if you're talking about the rings, but you're not focusing on Numenor. So I don't know. It is tough to encapsulate both of those huge moments, or huge events, I should say. The Forging of the Rings on Middle-earth and the Downfall of Numenor. Those are happening at different times, different places, but they're both, like, if you're talking Second Age, you've got to check the box on both of those things. And so how do you, in one phrase, encapsulate both of those events? I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah. I mean, I have a working hypothesis. As long-term viewers know, I don't do spoilers on this. So if you're interested in sort of spoilers and set photos, I know that they are out there. I tend to recommend people check out Fellowship of Fans, who it has got very good sources. So
stuff,
if you're interested in that, do go over there. My general feel and take, though, is that what they are trying to do, based on what they've given us officially, is a huge, for maybe even the first 2 episodes, a huge swathe of history, then focusing in on the bit that is where the real action is going to be. So, and I think that balance is, Lyle, you're asking about what they have to get right. I think this is the first of the 2 things I think they have to get right for me, is that the timescales of the Second Age are massive, and in order for you to understand the implications of what happens at the end of the Second Age, you have to understand things that happened thousands of years earlier.
Definitely.
And getting that kind of balance right is, so you can buy into, you need to have the plot of what's happening, but at the same time you need to understand the huge scale of time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that whereas with the Lord of the Rings movies you could get away, they didn't have to even mention the Valar or the Undying Lands, just got of little bits here and there. That whole kind of thing you didn't have to mention. For this, certainly at the end of when we get to the destruction of Numenor, this is direct intervention by God. This is and a whole lot of the play. There is a bit of partway through the Second Age, there's a conversation effectively between emissaries of the Valar and the king of Numenor. So actually, we have got a lot more kind of
it's the reason they go, right? They're trying.
Yeah.
The idea of immortality. You've got to set that up as a thing before you just kind of show them being destroyed. Yeah.
And this is higher fantasy than the Lord of the Rings, which is a kind of a strange way of saying it, but it's like the what you're dealing with are gods and angelic beings and things of that nature, not just elves and dragons and magic users. So those for me are the things I think they really need to get right in terms of a feel.
Yeah, I think also I would add that I'm really eager to see how I mentioned how Sauron was jealous of Numenorean technology, Numenorean society. I think they need to get that right. I think the look of Numenor, the feel of Numenor, it needs to be something really dramatic. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the creative minds put together for the look of Numenorean culture. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing I am absolutely certain of, it's going to look amazing. That I'm absolutely convinced of. They are the amount of money is one thing. Clearly, they're spending huge amounts of money on this. There's no doubt. But also the attention to detail seems to be huge. I've said this, the post-production, this is not just a random detail. The post-production between finishing filming and actually us seeing it is 13 months. That is ridiculously long. It's like embarrassingly long. It's, if you compare it to you would get Game of Thrones right until the last season or 2 would be operating on a yearly cycle. So their post-production would be like 3 or 4 months. Once they film everything, then post-production, they would manage to get that in, including all CGI of dragons and things like that. Even with the kind of the strange last couple of years we've had, the Wheel of Time, which, as I said, looks really good, that post-production was, I think, 5 or 6 months. The Witcher is, again, like maybe 6 or 7 months. This is double that. This is like taking the next level. Every single thing, they're going to get the music exactly right. Then they're going to make sure that all of the graphics look exactly right. They're taking absolutely no chances with this, which has to be good. I have to say, I'd much rather they take as long as they want and get it right than rush it out.
Agreed.
Good. Let's go to question back from my patrons. Actually, Lar Hammock, you, as well as dropping things in the chat, you've also sent me a few questions through beforehand, so let's pick up on those. Saying, we know the Numenoreans came first as benevolent protectors to the peoples of Middle-earth, bringing advancement and knowledge before eventually coming as conquerors and enslaving the peoples of Middle-earth. Does Tolkien tell us how they justified it? Or are we left to infer that the idea that as a superior people they believed it was their right? I think it's a really interesting question. I'd love your thoughts on this, Matt. Just for context, for those who don't know. So we get this island kingdom, and as I say, they loved all things to do with sailing and swimming. It took them a little while to get into it, but once they did, they were sailing all over the place, these Numenorians. And they started out by just doing trading relations out into Middle-earth. Then they established a few little settlements, some ports. Then they turned these into citadels. And then over time, as Numenor itself declined, then you see that these turn from being friendly, let's go over there and hey, we can exchange a little bit of technology and maybe do a bit of trade, and then it turned into we're actually ruling these nations and areas and we're demanding tribute from them. So what's your take, Matt, on this, how they justified it? What do you think was their thinking behind this shift?
Yeah, I think, just for starters, actually, I was just having a conversation with one of my awesome commenters, Crafty Spirit, who was asking me about a particular passage from the history of Middle-earth. It's a bunch of notes and stuff all put together in a giant compendium. And it's an unfinished story that Tolkien wrote from the perspective of native Middle-earth folks being colonized. And in fact, I think the title character is Tal Elmar. And, whatever. It's a fairly complex little cultural observation, but one of the things they see is they see these boats coming, and they know what they are. They're terrified. And in fact, they're extra terrified because one of the boats has black sails. And to them, to the indigenous folks, the black sails means that's where they're going to enslave us. They're going to take away a boat full of us as slaves. And so, anyway, he becomes like the emissary to try to deal with these folks, and they capture him. And it's not a good look at Numenorean colonization. I'll say that. It condemns the Numenoreans in this moment. And we don't know what time period this is taking place. I would guess it's fairly close to the downfall if I had to put it in a time. I think the way that the colonization worked is that it got progressively worse as the Kingsmen rose to power. And from the Kingsmen, I guess, philosophy, right? So they're turning against the Valar. They're turning against, kind of the old ways. And I think they become much more about take what you can. And we want resources. They've got resources. We need to build more ships. They've got the wood for the ships. Let's just go take it. I think it's we can, therefore we will impose our will on these folks. And so, yeah, it's not a good look, but I think that's the way they rationalized it, was just, we have the power, and so we're going to use it in this moment. We're going to colonize this area for our benefit, not necessarily for theirs, but for ours.
Yeah, there's a self-centeredness, there's a lust for power, which certainly came over in the second half of Numenor. That was very clear direction of travel that happened. From actually, and while we're here, and as I have you, one of my favorite videos of yours is when you you pinpoint who you think is the Witch King of Angmar. And for those who are new to this whole idea, that the 9 rings, we were talking about the forging of the rings, these happen in the Second Age. Sauron has got these rings, and then he distributes them. And we're told a few facts about who he distributes these to. We know the name of only one of them, Cumall the Easterling. So there are 8 unnamed people. They are all men. They are kings, sorcerers, and warriors, and they gained great power through what it was. And we know that 3 of them were in Numenor. Now, your theory is that one of those 3 was actually one of the kings of Numenor. Do you want to just sort of expand on that one a little bit? Because I find this fascinating, that the idea that maybe, even in the show, maybe we're going to see the Witch King.
That's right. You know, I keep thinking every time that they recently published The Nature of Middle-earth, every time there's a new set of notes that gets published, that we're going to get a note that Tolkien just wrote like, and by the way, the Witch King is... And then like, oh, okay, now we know, because he doesn't identify who the Witch King is, but we know so much about the Witch King. Like once he becomes the Witch King, all of those, from Angmar attacking what used to be Arnor, the various battles he fought in, and then of course Lord of the Rings, we have him having conversations with folks. We know a lot about him post Witch King, and so yeah, the identity I threw out, the most likely target for me, based on the time frame and the personality of the person involved, was Tar Atanamir, and that video had a litany of reasons, but I think of a couple of them. One was the rings give you long life. That's one of the powers. It gives you the idea of, hey, you can be practically immortal with these rings. We know that Tar Atanamir was obsessed with trying to extend his life, and in fact, other than Elros, who was our first king of Numenor, who was a half elf and kind of had an unfair advantage, Tar Atanamir, the longest lived of all the Numenorean kings, lived well past 400 years old. He's the first Numenorean king to not give up power before he dies. It's a tradition in Numenor. Hey, you know what? I'm getting a little too old for the job. I'm going to pass the rod of rulership on to my son or daughter, so that the land is in good hands as I go through my retirement. Well, no, not so with Tar Atanamir. He's like, no, I'm not giving up power. I'm keeping it until I die. Pry this from my dead hands, which to me would be a personality trait of someone who's becoming corrupted by, say, a ring. That lust for power is being sated. And sure enough, if you're a king and you've got the power, you don't want to give it up. There's an interesting misprint. Well, it's chalked up as an edited misprint in later publishings. But in The Lord of the Rings, if you picked up a book now and you looked in the appendices for Return of the King, you will see that the date of Atanamir's death is the same date, I think it's 2251 in the Second Age, it's the same date as the appearance of the 9 Nazgul. It's written in there, there's only 3 things that are written on that date, and 2 of them are Atanamir dies and the Nazgul show up. And notably, Tolkien doesn't just write the death date of every king of Numenor. It's very specific. So it's just interesting that he combines those 2 events in this 1 year, suggesting maybe he didn't die. He ceased to be, in that he basically became the spiritual form and became a servant of Sauron in that moment. Anyway, there's more to it, but essentially, Tar Atanamir is my best guess, and yeah, I'll be definitely watching the show to see if they go ahead and do their own theorizing and put a name on the Witch King in the show. That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I love this theory, and which is why I'm really glad that you got a chance to share it, because the witch, maybe not the Witch King, we don't know, because Tolkien didn't say the Witch King was one of those 3, but 3 of the ring bearers, 3 of the Nazgul were in Numenor, and there is actually, as you say, there's quite a tight window of a couple of hundred years or so, when after Sauron distributes these rings and before the the ring wraiths appear as wraiths. There's quite a tight window of when that is. And given the fact that the Numenoreans lived so long, you're actually only down to, I think there's three possible rulers, one of whom is generally a good guy, so we're probably thinking it's not him. And then it's just another two that it could have been. And the date here just works just perfectly for it. So I love this idea. It's not something, as you say, in the absence of any random scribbled note from Tolkien himself, we can't be 100% sure, but it works.
Also, just the fact that the Witch King, is the leader. He assumes the leadership of this group of Nazgul, and to do that, you have to, I feel like in life, have been a leader of men, and so that the idea that he's a king. Plus, he's always attacking Arnor, former Arnor, which sure it's probably at Sauron's bidding, but there might be also a sense of that's where Elendil set up shop. That's the guy who would be with the Numenorean king royalty line. It could be a little revenge motif going on there too.
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely love it. Just one very quick technical issue for those who watch these for the last 2 or 3 weeks. You'll know that my microphone has occasionally been playing up. If you're watching this live, could you just let me know whether it's been okay? We've been going for a bit over an hour now. I think it's better now, and so nobody said anything. But could you just let me know? I try every single time to thank my patrons. This is why I frame all of these around questions from my patrons, not just because they're excellent questions, but also as a thank you. I cannot do what I do. I cannot devote the time that I do to this without the support of my patrons. So patrons, thank you very much. If you are interested in supporting this channel, the very best way of doing that is by becoming a patron. There's a link down in the description, or if you're watching live, wherever the chat is on your screen. Thank you very much. Let's go to a quick question from... this is about another king of Numenor. This is Kelly Johnson saying, will we see a young Amandil-Pharazon friendship? Oh. I love this. I don't know whether we will, because as I say, this is over huge amounts of time. But this is one of these lovely little sort of relationship things that Tolkien's got in there. So Ar-Pharazon is the last of the Numenorean kings. He's the one who captures Sauron, gets brought down to Sauron's level, and allows the evil temple to be built, and then stages the attack over there onto Valinor. So he's a hugely important person. But we get Amandil he's the father of Elendil and grandfather of Isildur, and this is the family of the great heroes. So I'm absolutely sure we're going to be seeing these guys on the TV show. And the twist is that Pharazon and Amandil were good buddies when they were younger. They really got on. And the implication is that this is partly why they don't just get rid of them all. Why Ar-Pharazon doesn't just kill all of because they were a small minority. He could have just chucked them out of Numenor. He could have done that. But because he was friends with the patriarch, then perhaps that's why he didn't. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as well. I think you would see I think the show would be wise to show, that Amandil is also one of his advisors. I believe it's, he's on his council. And so at some point it comes to the point where look, you can't be on my council anymore. So I need you to leave now. But again, he doesn't just sacrifice him or whatever. He doesn't. He being Pharazon is doing some terrible things. But it is true that there's this little. It almost seems to have a soft spot for Amandil and his family. He knows where they are. If you want to go get them, you could easily find. They're on an island, and yet they while they are harassed and lots of the followers are taken and sacrificed, that particular family is somehow spared. And I think it is due to that relationship, and I think they'd be wise to show because it just shows a different spin on Ar-Pharazon. He says this is a guy who usurped power, did a forced marriage. He's done some terrible things, really, and then of course this, sacrificing folks, not great. And so, yeah, to show this other side of him that possibly, has some allegiance to old friends would be interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. He's a great character and has a great end, which we can talk about if people are interested. Let's talk about the rings a bit more, though. I had a question from Mara Lee saying, who assisted in the forging of the Rings of Power? And could you go over how Galadriel, Elrond, and Gandalf finally received theirs? What's the significance of them each having one? And did Sauron know that Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf each got a ring? I'll go over the sort of the headline bits of history here, and then Matt, perhaps if you want to sort of pick up with the sort of the thematic importance of those three characters. Sure. So Celebrimbor, he forged these rings. The key point about those three, what we call the three elven rings, although when they started out they were all elven rings because they were all being forged there, but the key point about those three were that those were ones that he did himself. Well, Sauron had nipped back to Mordor to try and forge the One Ring. Then Celebrimbor made these three. So all the other ones had the Sauron's touch on them. They had this personal connection with him. Those three didn't. They were good and they were pure and they did all the things that they should do. There was still a kind of magical connection across to the One Ring, but they weren't evil in and of themselves. Which, as a complete aside, I think we have to just take this and just sort of doff our hats for a moment to Celebrimbor, because actually he made these amazing magical items which were really important later, and it's very easy to sort of forget that, but these were incredibly important. So anyway, these three were the ones that got saved. They got distributed. Then the initial idea came, why don't we just destroy all these rings? Clearly Sauron's got some cunning plan. They couldn't quite bring themselves to destroy them, but those three got distributed. He gave up these three rings, which again is another thing in his favor, I think. One Definitely. Went to Galadriel. He had a massive crush on Galadriel, so that's kind of and she was at the time then the greatest, most powerful elf there in Middle Earth. So there, and then the others went off to eventually to Gil-galad, who was the sort of the king of the elves in the west, and Círdan, who we also know Círdan's the shipwright. He gets a cameo at the very end of the movies. He's the guy there at the Grey Havens who builds the ships that people can then head off, that the elves can then head off to Valinor in. But he's this kind of he's the far-sighted. He's very wise. He just stays there. He's got a beard, which is very un-elvish, but also sort of shows his age and wisdom. And so Gil-galad had Elrond staying with him for a long time, and he eventually, Elrond inherits that from Gil-galad. And Círdan is there when Gandalf arrives, when he's sent to Middle-earth. Círdan then gives him the ring that he has because he's farsighted, and he gives this wonderful little speech, which if I thought about it, I would have cut and pasted it somewhere because it's really good. But it's just basically saying, you'll need this, not me. I'm just going to be sitting here making boats. You need to go out there, and this is going to keep you going in hard times. It's going to help you kindle hope amongst the people. There you go. So that's how the three of them ended up with them, and Sauron did not know because they were not worn. While Sauron had the One Ring, they didn't wear them, so that kind of connection thing was not there. And then during the Third Age, when Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel had the rings, Sauron did not have his One Ring, so he couldn't see. So he did not know where they were, and they the power of the rings, such as they were, also helped to kind of hide, to mist what was going on, which was why Sauron couldn't see what was happening in places like Lothlorien, because of the power of the ring. But Matt, do you want to just sort of add to that? What sort of thematically, why is it important that these three rings go to those people?
Yeah, actually, I even had part of that quote you were hoping you had. I was like, oh, that's important. So it's Círdan says, "For this is the ring of fire, and with it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill." So he's giving the ring to Gandalf with that directive, wisely realizing that Gandalf's going to put better use to it than he would. One of the things I think also about the ring, Nenya, the ring that Galadriel takes, is that she uses it. You mentioned the idea that it can obfuscate. I think she uses it similarly to the girdle of Melian, which Melian back in the First Age was Galadriel's mentor, essentially. And she had this very powerful enchantment that kind of obscured Doriath and kept it safe. And so I feel like Galadriel is using the ring in the Third Age, much the way Melian created the girdle Melian back in the First Age. But as to whether Sauron knows, and you mentioned that he doesn't, we do have a couple of quotes that definitely tell us that he does not yet know. One is that Galadriel in Lord of the Rings says he suspects, but he does not know, not yet. Again, he probably would suspect, right? He's like, what are the two areas where there's like a really huge elven presence, some of the most powerful elves in the region? Maybe that's where I should check out for the rings, but he does not know that. And as far as Gandalf, that's completely off the grid. And there's a quote from the Silmarillion that says, "But the red ring remained hidden until the end, and none save Elrond and Galadriel and Círdan knew to whom it had been committed." So Sauron definitely doesn't have any thought of where that ring might be. Yeah, I think it's the ring of air, fire, water. It definitely, I mentioned how Celebrimbor made these rings as almost like a legacy of his grandfather making the Silmarils, but there's a Silmaril parallel here that it's nature being harnessed to aid humanity. I don't know. Anyway, there's the symbolism of those rings harkening back to the Silmarils, harkening back to the Age of Trees. I feel like there's a lot going on there as well.
Oh, there definitely is. And then this is why I think it's important that he gave them up. Because if we're comparing Celebrimbor, as I think Tolkien wants us to, if we're comparing Celebrimbor to his grandfather Fëanor, who made the Silmarils, Fëanor's whole thing was that he was going to get them back. And everything was just, he was, Morgoth took them, but he threw everything at trying to get them back. Celebrimbor, when he realized he'd been tricked, he gives them away, and that is a complete opposite of what his grandfather was about. And whereas the Silmarils, yes, they had within them this beauty, the light from the trees, which is an astonishingly holy thing. Also, there was something about them that was dark. In that people lusted after them, people needed them, wanted to keep hold of them, and whereas that is almost the opposite of what you have with the three rings, is that the three rings that are there as a blessing to others. They're not. Yes, I'm sure it helps Gandalf make nice fireworks and things like that, but generally speaking, it's about how can he inspire hope amongst other people? How can Galadriel keep Lothlorien safe for her people? So they're a lot more pure. Connected to the rings, as we're still talking on them, I had a question also from Canis Lupus Rex saying, how were the elves able to detect that Sauron was trying to control their three rings of power using the One Ring? Was it simply that Sauron's craftsmanship in the design of the One Ring was not up to the task and he underestimated them? I suppose Sauron had expected the three elves to slowly become wraiths like the Nine Men. And how much control did the One Ring, in fact, have over the 7 dwarves? Was it a failure there too? Well, do you want to pick up on one of them, and I'll try and do the other one? What do you think about the do you want to carry on about the elves, or do you want to talk about the dwarves for a bit?
I'll talk about the dwarves. How about that? Actually,
Go for it.
Found a quote that might be helpful on that one. So we got the 7 rings, and they were distributed to basically the leaders of the 7 dwarven clans. And we get this quote from the Silmarillion that says, "The dwarves indeed prove tough and hard to tame. They ill endure the domination of others, and the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom. Nor can they be turned to shadows," which is interesting. "They use their rings only for the getting of wealth. But wrath and an overmastering greed of gold were kindled in their hearts, of which evil enough after came to the prophet of Sauron. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hordes of the dwarf kings of old was a gold ring." So that's the power that they used of these rings was to amass wealth. But there's that suggestion that it actually didn't even turn them invisible. It's kind of interesting. I think they could resist the rings more so because, as you had just mentioned not too long ago, they are children of Aule. And Aule is also the patron Vala of Sauron. And I think there's a sense that they understand this art of making, of crafting, to the point that they are more resistant than, say, someone who isn't a child of Aule. So that's my theory on why the dwarves are more resistant than, say, the men are to the force put on them by the One Ring.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's the dwarves are different to humans and elves and halflings who come from humans, and also orcs who come from elves. That this is all coming from the children of Ilúvatar. The dwarves are separate. They're brought sort of within the fold, as it were, but they were created separate. And so it feels a little bit to me as if, yes, Sauron didn't quite understand what was going on there. He wasn't designing them for the dwarves initially, I don't think. So maybe it just didn't quite work out. In terms of just as a sort of a clarification, actually, I think it's worth saying. So all of these rings were made not initially so that Sauron was thinking, okay, so what I really want are 3 that I can give to elves, 9 that I can give to humans. That wasn't what his thinking was. He was wanting a whole load of these. And the implication is that they were all made by the elves, and that he was hoping that the elves would be putting these rings on, and then he would be able to control them. There was no mention of dwarves to start with. This was all about the elves. And so when he put on the One Ring, he was expecting or hoping to be able to control the elves who put on those rings. So they are all originally elven rings. It's only later that he thought to himself, you know what, I'll try them on other races. And he found that humans were very easy to control and dwarves were not very easy to control. So that's there. About how the elves were able to detect Sauron, that he was trying to do it. Tolkien doesn't say specifically the exact mechanics of it. This is what I got the quote here, which I think happened just before the quote that you've said about the dwarves. I think, as soon as Sauron set the One Ring upon his finger, they, the elves, were aware of him, and they knew him, and perceived that he would be master of them and of all that he wrought. Then, in anger and fear, they took off their rings. So that's what we're told, and it's very matter of fact from Tolkien. It's not, there's no hugely poetic language. It's like a connection has been made, then they realize who this person is, then they realize what the magic does, and they go, well, I'll take it off then. And the underlying implication, I think, is that yes, probably again, Sauron kind of overestimated the power of the rings or underestimated the willpower of them. I imagine this as being like a Dungeons and Dragons. They just pass their willpower check. That's
That's
the
right.
way I
Roll
see
+2.
this. Exactly, and they did good. Maybe there could have been one who just thought, you know what, I'll keep it on, but no, they all did all right. So that's the kind of feel. And then
I was thinking that perhaps too there might be a little I don't know. Again, this is all theory crafting, but the idea that when it came to the 9 and the 7, Sauron was pretty much there in the room overseeing construction and like, here's the recipe, use this recipe. And then he goes back to Mordor, and Celebrimbor is without Sauron in the room, working with the recipe to create these 3 elven rings, but he's adding to it. He's doing his own version of Sauron's recipe. So when the time comes, there's a difference to the rings that perhaps Sauron didn't anticipate, because Celebrimbor added a touch to these rings that then let him perceive Sauron as in a similar way that Sauron's perceiving him. Perhaps, anyway, just like a change in the recipe meant that Celebrimbor could perceive Sauron perhaps in a different way. Maybe.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree with that. That makes complete sense. Let's go to a couple of questions from the chat. Kelly Johnson saying, will Elrond see his twin brother on his deathbed? I think this is a TV show question. I will answer this in a slightly broader sense, if that's okay, because the short answer is Tolkien didn't write about that. But the sort of the broader thing is that the approach of the TV show, we've been told, this is 2-3 years ago, when Tom Shippey, the legendary Tolkien scholar, was sort of on board for a little while. And his take was that the Tolkien estate, and his advice was that if Tolkien wrote about something, you have to stick to it on the TV show, that you cannot change what is law there. If he didn't write about it, go for your life, go crazy, do what you want. So what the TV show is almost certainly going to do, in my view, is where there are gaps, then they will create the story that they want in those gaps, as long as it doesn't contravene anything that
right.
Tolkien
you don't have a
explicitly
snowball
said.
effect. Yeah,
exactly. So might Elrond have gone to see his brother on his deathbed? Tolkien doesn't write that he does, and one could potentially argue that the elves, until a little bit later, that the Numenoreans weren't traveling very far. The elves didn't seem to be coming in all that much, so it doesn't seem likely. But at the same time, yeah, it's a nice thought. Why not? There's no reason why he couldn't, so they could do that. But that's at the first bit of the Second Age, which is less likely to be covered on the TV show, is my general view.
Yeah, I hear you. That's before the forging of the rings and such as well. So.
Oh yeah. So that's that. I mean, he was 400 years or something. He was king, something like that.
Well, he lived 500, but yeah. So he was there for quite a while, but it's still going to be pre-forging of the rings. You're right. How much time are they going to spend on that era?
I would imagine that they will show the creation. If I were them, if I ruled the world, they showed the creation of Numenor and people going there and the establishment of it, and then they can fast forward a bit. Gigi Quillian saying, I love these little get-togethers, even though I'm always late. Here's a little something for a couple of pints. Well, thank you very much. That's very kind. I shall certainly have a pint. As I say, I always with one of the things. This is a complete aside. Apologies for my slightly rambly moment. But one of the things when I was as part of the Song of Ice and Fire Game of Thrones community, which was fantastic, was when there was a point when all of these content creators, we all met up it was in Nashville. There was a convention over there, and it was fantastic just meeting people and just having a beer with people that you've been in connection with over all this time. You maybe done live streams with. So this is my hope, is that perhaps the same kind of thing might be able to happen with Tolkien content creators at some point, where we can all get together and actually meet each other in real life. I have met a couple, but there are so many more wonderful people.
So that would be awesome.
For example, I will happily buy you a beer as and when we actually meet in real life.
So be it.
So be it. Yes. So it is said, so it shall be. Let's go. Mara Lee, thank you so much, Mara. Saying a huge thank you to both of you for all the fabulous information. I'm really enjoying the live stream. Well, I'm glad you are.
Thanks so much.
That's really kind. Yep, I think that's caught up on. Although I just going through the chat, I say I'm just caught up. My eye is caught, as it always is, by the mention of Tom Bombadil. Agalos Dimitropoulos saying, "What was Tom Bombadil doing in the Second Age? Did Tolkien write anything about him? If not, what do you think?" Well, I always love talking about Tom Bombadil, but Matt, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are we going to see Hey Do Dilly Do?
I mean, Tom Bombadil is certainly around. I mean, that's unquestionable. He's got his plot of land, and he's there in the Second Age. He is not connected to the major events that are happening in the Second Age that we know about. But that said, I think it's possible, I would say not probable, but possible that we get a cameo, right? That I think he's got control of those woods, that forest, and I could imagine we see someone traveling through the old forest or something, and we get perhaps a Bombadil sighting or a mention or something like that. I feel like I think he was a steward of the forest at that time, and we don't know much about like a specific thing, like, oh, there was that time when such and such happened in the old forest. So I guess I don't know specifics, but he was certainly around. And as far as we know, the old forest stayed on well into the Third Age, so he must have been doing a reasonable job.
Absolutely, I would agree with you 100% on that. It's he's there, but he won't be passing beyond the confines of his land. So unless for whatever reason they wish to show us it, and I don't think they will. I would love a cameo. But I very much doubt it. Reflective Rambling saying, "No talking about him without singing." Nice try, but no, I'm not singing the Tom Bombadil song.
I'm going to put on my yellow boots.
I will spare you that. Cloaked Juan just actually putting in a super chat the question that I just asked. I picked that one up randomly out of the chat, but thank you so much for picking that one up. So I think we've answered that one about Tom Bombadil. John Pierce saying, "Love both of your content, just sending love." Thank you very much. And Clark and Taco saying, "Just sending my love of IDG and now Dork Lords." Thank you very much. Excellent. Well, I'm loving being able to convert people to new content creators. One of the things I enjoy doing, if you've got this far in, if you've managed 1 hour and 42 minutes of listening to us talk about Lord of the Rings, then you clearly are a big fan of Dork Lords already without realizing it. What you need to do, there is a link down in the description to Dork Lords. Go, subscribe, enjoy it. It's not just Lord of the Rings. There's some lots of content about many wonderful things. Some things that I believe are wonderful, but I do not cover on this channel, like Dune, like Foundation, and a few other things as well. So do go and check that out. Let's pick up on another question from one of my patrons. This is Canis Lupus Rex again, still talking about the rings, but the lesser rings. Saying, did the lesser rings that were forged in the lead up to the eventual forging of the Rings of Power make any appearances in the Second Age or have any impact on events? Gandalf seems to have mistaken the one ring carried by Bilbo for one of the lesser rings. And since Gandalf doesn't seem overly surprised by the magical quality it displayed, presumably then the lesser rings could have been quite impressive magic of their own. What else is known? Well, I'll give a little bit of the background, then I'd love your thoughts on this one. So I did do a video on this if you're interested ages ago. But broadly speaking, I said this was a long con by Sauron, this 300-400 years of creating magical rings. The Rings of Power that we know of were the culmination of that, but they kind of built up to it by creating lots of smaller rings, minor magical rings. They're known as the lesser rings. And they, unlike the Rings of Power, which have jewels in them and look pretty and are great, these are just plain bands, which is why Gandalf assumes that the One Ring is one of these lesser rings because it looks just like a plain ring, unadorned, but clearly is magical, clearly can make you invisible. And from what he says, he thinks it could have other powers. He's very clear it might be not just making you invisible, which seems to imply that, yes, some of these lesser rings, and Gandalf is quite clear, then none of them are to be trifled with. I think was his exact phrase. They could have lots of different powers, and he doesn't seem to know himself all of these different lesser rings. But as for what happened to them, well, the implication is that they were in Eregion, which is where Sauron then invaded. They're not the ones that got
laid waste.
Yeah, they're not the ones that got distributed, the 3 elven rings that went on. They're not ones that we get told specifically that he gathered and then distributed himself, the 9 and the 7. So what happened? Were they destroyed? Did he get them? Did some of them get smuggled out? What's your take, Matt? Have you got any thoughts on these lesser rings?
So when we say the lesser rings, are we talking about, for instance, the 7 and the 9, or are we talking?
No, the ones even before that were the practice rings. So this is the and what Gandalf seems to have done when he saw that Bilbo had a ring of power. He didn't think immediately that must be the One Ring. It took him quite a while to come to that conclusion, but it was clearly a magical ring, and he seems to have thought that it was one of these practice rings that they were doing in Eregion, because it looked like one of them, and the power that it seemed to be displaying, making you invisible, seemed about the right power level as far as we can tell.
The only ring I can think of that's not one of our, our 7, 3, 9 that we hear about in the Third Age is one that Saruman has been making, and he's got, I think, because again he's a servant of Aule. Crafting, I think he has been attempting to create his own version of a lesser ring, let's say. Yeah, I don't think he would call it that. He'd hope it was an awesome ring. But he's trying to create a magical ring of his own. But because we just don't hear about these rings being used at all, during the Second Age or even into the Third Age. I'm going to guess that the majority of them were destroyed in Eregion. Or if you would think if Sauron rounded them up that he would kind of redistribute them, perhaps, or but yeah, I guess I don't know the whereabouts because we don't have a lot of lore that says, oh, so and so character had this extra ability because of this ring that he had. Yeah, I guess that's a mystery. I'm not sure.
And I think that's absolutely fine because I think no one's sure is the short answer. So Gandalf wasn't sure. A few of them, the implication that him thinking this was one of them, the implication is that he thinks a few of them might have got out from Eregion. It was a long period of time, so that's entirely makes sense. Just in the chat, Andrew K saying, in Deep Geek, good idea. 400k might be having you singing a wonderful tune. Well, I will live to regret this. But on 300, when I hit 300,000 subscribers, I did. I made a promise which I kept to wear the old cowl that I wore in the very, very early days of Deep Geek. At 400,000 as a treat to, and I do this for my wonderful moderators who do an amazing job. But as 2 of my wonderful moderators are now asked, as and when I hit 400,000, who knows when that will be? Remind me. You have my word. I will sing a Tom Bombadil song.
Nice. We heard it here first.
There we go.
That's awesome.
Heard it here first. It's that will happen. So if you want to hear me sing Tom Bombadil, subscribe.
Hit that button.
Exactly. So Kelly Johnson saying, will we see Sauron pressing the Edain strong places? Is this a quote? Do you know, Matt?
Yeah. Are we saying like on Middle Earth? Like in other words, are we saying that Sauron's attacking the folks on Middle Earth? Is that what we're saying?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think if we're talking about the Edain, who by the time they become the Numenoreans effectively. So I think we won't see them as the Edain that much, I don't think, in the show. What we will see, I think, is Sauron at the very end of the Second Age attacking the Numenorean strongholds of Gondor and that.
Right. So in other words, Minas Ithil becomes Minas Morgul when it gets taken over, for instance. I got you. So yeah, late in the Second Age, I think you would have to see Sauron's effect on the land and his, the detriment that having Sauron around gives your society. I think you'll even see, this will kind of, again, this is like season 5. If there's a 5-season run, this is like season 5, probably. But there's this really kind of tragic event that happens. It's kind of just thrown in there in the background. But the Last Alliance is marching. They're heading for Barad-dûr. Sauron's trying to slow them down. And so what he does, part of his effort to slow them down is he sets fire to an entire forest range. It becomes known as the Brown Lands for thousands of years, meaning he burned it probably with some kind of magical fire to the extent that nothing can grow forever, practically. That area, we're pretty sure, is where the Entwives were. And the implication is that Sauron killed the Entwives, not necessarily on purpose, but to say, I'm going to destroy this forest. I'm going to start a fire so the army can't march in. And that's where, when we say, where did the Entwives go? Sauron killed them during this War of the Last Alliance. And that would be this, I don't know how you get to that point to show all that, but it would be very dramatic to see this despicable, tragic act occurring, which then thousands of years later has Treebeard still wondering, where are the Entwives? Anyway, that would be a...
No, I mean, I think that's really, really good call. I think the if I ruled the world in how they make this, it will take us up to the point at which we pick it up from the films with that flashback. So it's almost as if we go all the way up and then we say, this is going to take us up through the history to the point at which Sauron gets defeated. And this is the opening sort of chapter, effectively the prologue to the Lord of the Rings. So I think that would be how I would do that. And yes, that would certainly encompass that horrific act, but also then potentially up to this point of like the cutting the ring from Sauron's finger. I mean, how amazing would that be to be? That's like the final shot of, like, if we have 5, 6, 7 seasons, whatever it is, going up to this point where Isildur, who we will probably be meeting, as early as season 1, cuts the ring from Sauron, who will have been the baddie all the way through this, and Sauron is defeated and falls. And then we have Isildur with the one ring, and it's like, we know what happens next. How that would be, he's this great hero, he's done this amazing thing, but we know what happens next, fade to black. That for me would be a wonderful way to round all of this off.
I would throw in like a version B. Like, I'd love that idea. Second best would be if we end with a really strong retelling of the disaster at Gladden Fields. They cover it in The Lord of the Rings, but it's kind of glossed over. Like, that scene, that event, it's incredibly impactful for the history of Middle-earth, because it's Isildur dies, 3 of his sons die, the ring is lost. Like, a lot happens all in this one moment, and it's really, really dramatic. That would be another potential end beat for the series that I would be like, wee, awesome.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think many of us will be.
That'll
right. Be exactly how we should be. Belladrian saying, no question, just a bit to buy cookies for Dan. Thank you very much. That's Dan, my dog, who incidentally, normally he puts himself to bed, but just today, again, complete rambly aside, just today he stayed downstairs, and it's the first time he's stayed downstairs while I've had this green screen up. So I've just got this thought in the back of my mind that if you suddenly see the Valinor itself collapse behind me, then you'll know that that's Dan who's just come to investigate what's happening here.
Awesome. I've got
so
Kittalor. Kittalor, my cat, is right over here. She is fast asleep, literally sleeping on her face. So I'm not going to disturb her. But yes, she's my familiar for the day.
Excellent. And I seem to be getting some love for the idea of the Tom Bombadil song. Who knew that would be popular? Daniel King, could Sauron ever come back? Great show, thank you guys. I assume you mean after the end of like the
like in the fourth age at some point. Or
yeah,
something.
exactly. So what's your take? Is Sauron now completely gone, or could he ever come back?
I think if he was just a Maya spirit, there would be the implication that perhaps he could go, return to the West and then be reborn. And but I think because he put so much of himself into this ring, I think that's the downside of putting all this power, all of your spirit, yourself into this ring. When that ring disappears, you are in real trouble. And so I don't see him returning. No, I don't think that's possible.
No, and I would agree with that. I mean, because he put so much of himself into the ring and the ring is destroyed, the extra layer to this is Morgoth, his great master. Tolkien, if you start reading his wider readings, you get this concept of Morgoth's ring. So we know what Sauron's ring was. He put himself into there. And Morgoth's ring was effectively Arda, Middle-earth itself.
Yes.
And so he has put part of himself into the world, which is why the shadow is always there. Tolkien he comes up with this concept and explains it in lots of different ways, but there is always evil will keep on coming back like a tree, just coming up again. That's the feel, because he has put himself into the world, and the legends within his creation, the legends of future kind of Dagor-Dagorath, the end times battle, is Morgoth coming back. So Morgoth will indeed return, and it's only when you get a completely new creation that you actually get rid of Morgoth completely.
Great point. I always thought of that in the reverse, which is that's a great point. That's why perhaps evil permeates the world, is because it's permeated with Morgoth. But I always thought of it as that's also why Morgoth is less powerful personally in that time, because he's dispersed his energy throughout the world. And so, for instance, he damn near gets beat by Fingolfin in a one-on-one duel. But you're right. The converse is true too, that the world itself has been permeated by Morgoth's evil. Yeah.
Question from Kelly Johnson again, saying, will Smaug fight in the last alliance of elves and men? So this presumably on Sauron's side is the question. Matt, what do you think on that?
We don't get dragons. I don't think I'm misstating this. I don't think we really get dragons in the second age. We have dragons in the first age, and then dragons pick up in the third age. The Withered Heath, and that area where we get a lot of the dragon spawning grounds and such. But seems like the War of Wrath took a lot of them out. So, is Smaug around? Is he alive? And if he was, would he be participating in the War of Last Alliance? There is no mention of dragons fighting in the War of Last Alliance, so I'm going to say he did not fight in that war. And in fact, I kind of think maybe he is a third age creation, but I could be wrong on that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think so. The dragons were there; they were Morgoth creations. And at the end of the War of the Wrath, at the end of the first age, a lot of them were killed. Some kind of managed to sneak away up into the far north, effectively hiding away. Pardon me. And they didn't. We're told that they kind of roused themselves again when Sauron in the Third Age started coming back into his power. So the implication is through the Second Age, then yes, they were up there. They might be eating the occasional dwarf, but that's about it. We're not told. We're not even told how old Smaug is, as far as I'm aware. I don't think we've got like a date of birth for him. I don't think he sort of says to Bilbo, "I am X years old." So that is a bit of information we do not have. I think the implication is no. The other element to this is that Smaug, although he was, and dragons, although they are sort of servants of Morgoth, he's an independent being. And it's very clear from what Gandalf surmises Sauron's plan to be for Smaug, which is to be sort of ravaging across the north of the map that we know, is that he's not there. Smaug isn't there at the beck and call of Sauron. He just thinks that he could be sort of prompted into action by him. So it's not that he's, the dragons have escaped. They're out. They're now independent. Yes, they're kind of sympathetic to the same cause, but they're not foot soldiers of Sauron by any stretch of the imagination.
So if he was alive, he still might not come to the call. In other words, right?
Yeah, exactly. Matt Savino saying, just wanted to say thank you for igniting my passion for reading again. Oh, I love it when people say this. I'm really pleased. I'm reading through Clash of Kings currently. And do you think the War of the Last Alliance will be shown on the upcoming show? I think we talked about the War of the Last Alliance and whether it will be on the show. And just a moment ago, this is why when I answer things in the chat a little to what we've covered that, but in terms of Clash of Kings, I'm really delighted. I'm pleased that if you're reading that, that's fantastic. I am doing my slow reread of the way through A Song of Ice and Fire at the moment. For those who are unaware, it's re-listen to. Actually, I'm listening to the audiobooks, and I'm coming towards the end of book 1, A Game of Thrones, and so I will be on A Clash of Kings very soon. If you want my thoughts on that, check out my Twitter, which I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere, but just go to Twitter and look for Deep Geek, and you will find me.
One little tidbit on the War of the Last Alliance is that we get a little note that says not only was it elves and men, where there is actually, even though Moria has closed its doors for a long, long time after the middle of the Second Age, they do send an army. So we have Durin's folk went and fought on the side of the good guys in the War of the Last Alliance. So the dwarves are also part of that alliance. I think that's a pretty heartening, unification of our folks here in Middle Earth, trying to ward off the evil of Sauron.
Yes, and they actually had a very specific role as well, because what they did, because they're right next to Eriador. So when and they were allies with Celebrimbor, and so when Sauron comes in and lays waste to Eriador, Elrond has come in trying to sort of save the day, and it's not quite working. And the dwarves come out from Moria, and they're the people who sort of stand fast and allow Elrond to go off and set up a new base, which turns into Rivendell over time. So their intervention then actually led to the creation of Rivendell. They're never credited for it, obviously, because the elves don't wish to give the dwarves credit for anything. Exactly, but it was their intervention that allowed Elrond to live and allowed Rivendell to be created. After that, then they shut the door of Moria and sort of hid away from the world afterwards. But yeah, they had a very crucial intervention going on there.
And I think that's something we'll see in the series is the rise of Rivendell, right? So we could see it from its creation, like a little base camp that we're setting up until this thriving metropolis. I think that's a cool arc that we could see in the Amazon series.
Yes, agreed. Reflective Rambling saying, happy birthday week for the Queen of A Song of Ice and Fire, creator support, and supermod Mara Lee. Mara, happy birthday to you. I said happy birthday to you a little bit earlier as well, but I hope you had a fantastic day, and you have my huge appreciation and love for all you do, not just for me, but I know for a huge amount of content creators as well. You do so much for this community. So thank you very much, and happy birthday. let's go to a question from where did we get to? I'm sure we had here we go. DZ Banker saying, how do Nazgul sleep if they hate pillows so much?
Just crushing the pillows, stabbing them over and over.
I think this is a movie. I think they're very good. I will. I don't. Do they sleep? Do Nazgul sleep? I don't.
Yeah, boy, I don't know that they need to. Yeah, I think they're sleepless menace.
Exactly. So, let's go back to a couple of questions from my patrons. This is. Oh, actually, have I done? I have not done my tinfoil theory about the lesser rings. I thought I might do this. Well, this
tinfoil theory, awesome! I love it.
Yeah. So we were talking about the Witch King of Angmar. I think I mentioned this on one of the previous live streams I did. But we were talking about the Witch King of Angmar. The Witch King of Angmar clearly is chief lieutenant to Sauron, and he is a sorcerer. We know this. We know that he has magic. And we know that one of the bits of magic that he does is he creates the Barrow Wights over and he sends them off. What do we know about the Barrow Wights? Well, this is not as much as you might think, but we do get two different descriptions of them. And there is one thing which connects both of them. The two descriptions, one of them is obviously in The Lord of the Rings, when the hobbits are there. The other one is in Tom Bombadil poem. And he talks about we hear about the Barrow Wights there. He's sort of paddling past them in his very Tom Bombadil way. The thing which both of the descriptions, they focus in on the fact that the Barrow Wights have rings. Now, I think this is a fascinating, as I say, it's a tinfoil theory, but I think that you can trace the line back and say, okay, we have a sorcerer who is involved in the creation of these things, who is the chief lieutenant of somebody who's clearly knows ring magic, and he himself is subject to ring magic. He will know about ring magic. How will he, if he wishes to create wights of his own, wraiths of his own, what does he do? Ring magic. So my take is that the Barrow Wights are actually this like next generation of lesser rings that the Witch King has created in order to capture and create these wights who are bent to his will.
That's an excellent idea. So it's just like a ring multi-level marketing scheme. It's a pyramid.
Exactly, yes.
I control you for my rings, and then I get controlled by the next level up. Okay. Yeah, no, I like that a lot.
So that's my favorite tinfoil theory of this year. I think it was Yoyston actually I had on when I gave that one, which I was delighted that he also liked it. So next year I will have a new pet tinfoil theory to come out. I shall reread it and come up with something else. Let's go to. I was going to do questions again. From this is the Usurped saying, hi Robert, thanks again for all you do. You're very welcome. My question is about the reshaping of Arda. After Eru sank the fleet, this is the Numenorean fleet, and the island of Numenor, we're told that Arda was reshaped. Previous to the reshaping, what form was Arda in? Was it flat Arda? Do you think this is a wink to the belief in a flat Earth before we reshaped our model into a globe? Well, I'll give the straight answer is that yes, this Arda was flat to start with, and then it got curved, which as an aside, you sometimes hear of the straight road, which is where the elves go to Valinor now, because Valinor has sort of disappeared off of the face of the world, and that's because the roads are now curved because it's a curved Earth. And the idea being that this is a straight one, which therefore doesn't follow the curve of the Earth, but it follows the straight path up to Valinor. So that's the sort of Tolkien playing with this idea about the shape of the Earth has changed, and therefore kind of other realms might have stayed the same, but Arda has changed. But what's pardon me, sorry. What's your take on this? Is this a sort of a Tolkien nod to flat Earth theory?
I don't think so, but I guess I don't know what his thought was on that. Perhaps he was a flat earther back in the day. I do have a quote though that I think just basically it's the moment in the text where we learn, oh, it used to be straight and now the world is curved. This is from the Silmarillion, and it says, "And those that sailed far came only to the new lands, and found them like to the old lands, and subject to death. And those that sailed furthest set but a girdle about the earth, and returned, weary at the last, to the place of their beginning. And they said, all roads are now bent," except for the straight road. So, yeah, this is in conjunction with the downfall. He basically creates this sphere with Aman on the outside of the sphere. And so, yeah, I just feel like it was, mythologically speaking, that was in his mind. He had this kind of a like two-dimensional space kind of thing that he was imagining, perhaps. And then, how do I have this incredibly momentous, cataclysmic event that really says something that changes the world forever? I know it's going to turn the world into a sphere at this moment. And so I feel like that's just to show the impact of the downfall of Numenor on the fate of the world. I think that's kind of what more the reasoning for why he did it that way.
Yeah, I agree. Carl Karsnark, thank you very much for saying Tolkien was a flat Middle Earther. Confirmed. Yes, he was. I think that the other level that I would just add on to this one is that I think we can also see him showing through the changes to the planet, and also specifically where the Valar are in respect of the planet, what that means in the kind of the moving towards the age of man, the dominion of man at the end of all, in the fourth age and going onwards. To start with, the Valar came down, they were there, they were on Arda, they were in part of it. Then next stage, they kind of moved to another continent. And then after that, they build up huge mountainous sort of wall all the way around it so nobody can get to the continent. Then they specifically put bans on people from coming to them. And then finally, they're sort of like taken away to sort of another dimension almost. And it's like
a spaceship to get to them practically.
Yeah. So it's like Tolkien's sort of saying, the Valar are moving further away, sometimes even physically further away from Middle-earth. And that is the kind of the feel of the movement of what has been going on from the very beginning, when they were there, right in the middle of things, to the end when they're absent, basically.
When we get that cycle a lot, the idea of things fading over time is a kind of a common through line in Tolkien's in Middle-earth literature. I think of, for instance, the light of the trees being this, first it was the lamps. The lamps are destroyed, then they create the trees, and there's this light from the trees, and then the trees are destroyed, but the light of the trees is held in these Silmarils, and then the Silmarils are dispersed, but the light of one of the Silmarils in the sky is caught in the Phial of Galadriel, and that still has the power to, help Sam defeat Shelob. But it's like the light gets dispersed over time. There's that sense of, fading. I don't know. It's interesting.
It is. And it's something Tolkien, I think, deliberately put into it. Marley saying, I'm interested in the role that the elves played in the Second Age, specifically Elrond and Galadriel's roles, and what we might see on the TV production when it airs. We've talked a little bit about their roles vis-a-vis the rings and the wars there with Sauron. What's your take in terms of the link with Numenor? Do you think that there was much, as leaving aside what speculation as to what might happen on the TV show, do you think that they cared about what was happening in Numenor? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were taken up with defending and maintaining their own realms, right? Because their realms are also not on the coast. The 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 chance for shipping back and forth, for instance, isn't really that much of a possibility with these two inland realms. They'd have to go out of their way to want to, communicate with, say, even the colonies. When you've got Umbar and Pelargir, which are down in the south. I don't know that they would have had a lot of interchange with Numenor. I have heard rumors that say that perhaps Galadriel will be, on Numenor perhaps in this series at some point, or visiting or something. And again, if it's not written, then it's fair game, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking about, does Elrond go to visit at his brother's funeral? So could they have visited Numenor at some point? Perhaps, but it does seem like they are too busy, because Sauron is a almost constant threat. Yes, he's defeated for a short period of time around the year 1700, but then he's right back, and he's a threat again to all the folks there on Middle-earth until the Numenoreans, come back and defeat him a second time. And then as soon as, Numenor sinks, Sauron's back, and he's a threat again. And so I think they are really taken up with defending Lorien, defending Imladris during this time, because their people got really decimated over the first half, of the Second Age. So I think they're trying to cling on to what they've got. It's part of also what the rings do, is they allow them to hold on to like a memory of what was for them. I think there's a little bit of that there too, and so yeah, I think they're in defensive mode and not in let's go and let's go out to Numenor. Now it's once obviously the Numenoreans arrive, Elrond certainly has he joins the War of the Last Alliance. I don't think Galadriel does. There's no text that says Galadriel was present in the War of the Last Alliance. And in fact, the implication is that she wasn't there. So, that's an interesting point on once we get through the War of Elves and Sauron, which is like 1700-ish of the Second Age. What is Galadriel's role after that? We'd have the White Council starts to meet. That's set up in Imladris. Elrond obviously is eventually going to marry Galadriel's daughter. So we have, that relationship perhaps forming that we could see in the series. But yeah, I don't know, how she affects the giant narrative in the second half of the Second Age.
No, and I think the only other thing I would add to that is, and I'm aware that I might start getting a reputation as having a bit of a downer on Galadriel, but she was quite power hungry, and her character arc is to move to a position at the end of the Lord of the Rings when she could actually turn her back on power, and that was what the whole thing with the saying no to the One Ring was. Fantastic scene. Kate Blanchett absolutely blew that out of the water when in the movies. But when she started, the reason why she went across from Valinor to Middle-earth, and we are told, is not because she agreed with Feanor. In fact, she hated Feanor's guts. It was because she wanted to rule a land. Mm-hmm. She wanted to have a place where she could be queen, effectively. So Tolkien puts it in a very nice way, because this is Galadriel and we can't say nasty things about Galadriel, but this is a lust for power.
Slander.
Exactly, it's a lust for power on her part, which is what took her over and why she stays there. And so in the Second Age, Tolkien is very vague. He changes his mind a lot on Galadriel's timeline in the Second and Third Ages, but that's when she starts pitching out to get her land. That's when she just goes and starts to figure out, as we said, that she seems to head off across to Lothlorien at some point there. Celebrimbor sort of taking over in her stead over in Eregion. So this is when she is actually doing her life's ambition, which is trying to go and rule somewhere. So I think that is what her main focus was, I think, in the Second Age. I think it'll all come good, because by the end of the Third Age, she realizes actually that she doesn't need this power, and she's done that now.
There's this sense of regret, actually, with her, and that she has that song that she sings when the Fellowship is leaving Lothlorien, the Amarie song. The words of that song are just like, I know that I'll never be able to go back to the West, and I have regrets about that. I'll never be able to experience that again. And so it's a much different Galadriel than we see in the Second Age, when she's basically saying, like, I reject your forgiveness. I'm not going back. Who are you to forgive me for anything? She's very, opposed to this idea of being forgiven by the Valar, and so it takes 6,000 years for her to kind of go, oh, maybe I did lose something in that moment. It's powerful stuff. But in the Second Age, she's still in the middle of her arc that ends in the Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. And just sort of connected with this, Lyle Hammock had a question. Could you give an overview of the War of the Elves and Sauron? I feel this is almost a forgotten war, and I think it would help people understand the effects which lasted into the Third Age. So this is, I don't know whether you wanted to sort of like take a first bash at this one, but this is the war, not the last alliance of elves and men. This is the one when Sauron comes in and takes on Eregion, and then there's what's actually quite a long war with the elves.
It's what you had mentioned, that that first foray, for sure, already, where Sauron attacks Eregion. Elrond is sent from Lindon to try to help Eregion in their time of need. Shows up in time to retreat. Basically, like, oh wow, we're outnumbered. The dwarves from Moria do their part to distract Sauron's forces long enough to let Elrond escape, but Eregion is just destroyed terribly, and Celebrimbor is taken on the steps, basically, of the capital, and then he is tortured for information, and eventually is killed, and he's put up on a pike, and they carry him around as they go, and Sauron is laying waste to much of Eriador. It's about a 5-year window or so where Gil-galad sends out a request for help from Numenor. Hey, remember how we had this alliance a while back, and I told you about this, and your king was like really good friends with me back in the day? We could use your help right now. And it takes them a while because there are some politics happening in Numenor. You've got Tar Telperion. We were talking about the queens. She is the queen of Numenor at the time of the Forging of the Rings and the beginning of this battle. And eventually, Tar Minister, the new leader, sends the navy. And so he sends them just in the nick of time. Sauron is closing in essentially on Lindon, on the coast. And in this big Battle of the Gwathlo, the navy shows up and fairly easily defeats Sauron. It's a pitched battle, but slowly but surely Numenor prevails, and Sauron is forced to retreat. And he runs off and disappears for a little while again. That seems to be his mantra, right? At the end of the First Age, he ran off, got strong again, and came back. And he kind of does the same thing. All right, fine, I'm defeated for now. But so in a nutshell, that's the idea: is Sauron is winning, is probably going to win, but for the timely arrival of Numenor, and Numenorean military is the strongest military force on the planet at that point, and so they take out Sauron's forces and win the day.
Fantastic summary. And I think that in terms of, so Lyle was wondering, I think, about as well the sort of the impact, the longer term impact. So the destruction of Eriador is clearly a very important one. The world would have been very different if Celebrimbor had been there, making presumably increasingly powerful magical items for the elves. Then you get the creation, the founding of Rivendell in Ladris. That's set up. That is going to have hugely long-term impacts. The fact that you get Celeborn and Galadriel basically giving up Eriador after this and having to head over at some point. As I say, Tolkien's quite vague on the details here. Heading over to Lothlorien, that's there as well. So there are lots of, and the dwarves shutting the doors on Moria. All of these things set the world of the Third Age up for the story of the Lord of the Rings. So, I would agree very much. And I think I saw somewhere in the chat just a moment ago, have you just become an uncle, Lyle? If so, congratulations. I hope I didn't misread that. If congratulations to you and also to people, the sister or whoever it was who had a baby.
Congrats.
Congratulations. Question from Bo Barnett. This is about Sauron again, with his going away and coming back, saying, "Hey Robert, hope you're doing well. What did Sauron do between the fall of Numenor and the Battle of the Last Alliance? Also, if he couldn't assume corporeal form, how could he wear the ring? Thanks." So this is taking us back to the end of the Second Age. So this is after Numenor's destroyed, and his body is destroyed, and his spiritual form goes back to Mordor. Then there's a period of time when the good guy Numenoreans, Elendil and his sons, set up the new kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor and do good things. They do impressive things. We've already talked about the Orthanc and the Argonath and things like that. That they have time to build a civilization, basically. And then Sauron comes back and there's another big battle. So what's your take of what he did in that time? And could you just talk us through if he couldn't take on corporeal form, how could he put on the ring, kind of some mechanics of that?
Yeah, I mean, as I, mentioned, there was that note in a letter that said perhaps he carried the ring back with him, but however that works, that doesn't really answer this question anyway. Spiritual form, I think through the power of the ring itself, since the ring actually is a significant portion of his body, his spirit, he is able to repair himself. However, he is no longer able to take on a pleasing form. He can't change into Anatar, for instance, anymore. He's stuck in this kind of deformed, kind of warped figure that will always be recognized. That's Sauron. And yeah, he builds up, an army. He is now delighted that Numenor is gone and cannot, in his mind at least, come over and keep thwarting him in his attempts to take over. And so it's particularly Minas Ithil. Like he raids that. I know there's a whole thing where Isildur is connected a lot to the White Tree. He saves a seedling from the White Tree back in Numenor at great personal cost. Like he's mortally wounded practically at having to save this thing and being stabbed the whole time. He takes that seedling, he plants a version of it. I believe he plants it at Minas Ithil, and sure enough, Sauron comes and destroys it, and then he replants it, and there's this series of replantings to keep this symbol of Numenor alive. But Sauron is definitely a threat during this time, and is getting the upper hand on Gondor, and so it's kind of up to this alliance, right? Elendil goes and talks to Gil-galad, and they have this big army, but it's way up, it's in the north, and it has to come south. So it takes a while, and actually the actual War of the Last Alliance, the march leading to the siege, leading to the battle, all that takes years to pull off. During which time Sauron is sending orcs to try to waylay the army. As I mentioned, he burns the forest. And there's actually a tragic, this is a little off topic, but it just reminds me of a little extra air of tragedy. in the battle of, they're at Barad-dûr. There's the wars going on, and we have this ill-advised charge by Thranduil's dad, actually, who gets killed, and many of the woodland elves get killed off. Even though the good guys win, many of the elves are killed off. And so they march home. They have to go a long way from Barad-dûr all the way back to Greenwood. And along the way, they pass by a group of orcs that are hidden in the woods. And they see these elves walking by, and they're sad because like 2/3 of them got killed off, and so did their leader, and Thranduil's now the new king. So they're not rejoicing. And these orcs, who were just sent out by Sauron to waylay whoever shows up, they let these guys pass because the group's a little too big for them. But they take it that they've won. Oh, look, the good guys are sad. That must mean we did pretty well in this battle. Awesome. All right, we're going to hang out. And so they wait for the next group they can pounce on. Well, 2 years later, that group is Isildur, and that's the Disaster of Gladden Fields, and the ring is lost at that point and all that stuff. So there's a sense of, if this ill-advised attack hadn't happened, if Thranduil's forces, if those forces had come back rejoicing, this group of orcs would have just given up and gone home, and they wouldn't have been there to have this Disaster of Gladden Fields happen. It's kind of this little chain link of events that Tolkien loves to put these. It's almost like this Rube Goldberg machine that just tick, 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 and then you had this terrible thing happen. And so that's just one of those chain of events things that I always thought was interesting.
Thank you for that. That was really, as I say, really quite poignant extra layer to what was going on. I think what I would just say in terms of Sauron, what I see here, in terms of mechanics, two things happen when Sauron, he loses his body, his physical form at the fall of Numenor, and he also loses the ability to take on whatever form he wants, which is something that he had and he used quite a lot. In fact, if you go back earlier in the Silmarillion, then he does this kind of shape-shifting when he's back in the Tale of Beren and Luthien. He seems to do this kind of shape-shifting. He's now one shape, he's now another shape. I'm a vampire, I'm a wolf, I'm a this, and he's just like moving about. He loses that ability, which means that when he does take on another form, his final form back in Mordor, it's just an expression of him. And he hasn't got any control over what this is, really. This is just who he is and what that looks like in physical form. And I think we then see this all of this time through the Second Age. He said, I've got a cunning plan with these rings. I've got a cunning plan to go and get myself captured by Numenor. I've got this cunning plan. It's almost as if he's like, that's it, I'm done with cunning plans. I'm just going to get filled with my anger. I'm going to build my army up and I'm going to attack them. And that's basically what happened then. And so that his physical form that he had then was just a reflection of who he had no control
bare
over.
Essence.
Exactly, no control at all, because he had lost that power.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
Question from Mara Lee saying, what roles did the dwarves play as well as the hobbits during this time period? I think we talked a little bit about the dwarves during this. I
have one thing to add about the dwarves, actually, but go ahead.
Go for it. No. Let's do the dwarves, and then we'll pick up on hobbits.
All right. So dwarves, there is actually a little mention that early in the Second Age, up basically until the War of Elves and Sauron, the dwarves had kind of a mutual protection society with humans. Kind of the ancestors of the Rohirrim, probably like some version of Northmen, allied with the dwarves, because after the War of Wrath, there were bands of stray orcs that were going around attacking everyone, and so to ward them off, it was a very effective alliance. The dwarves and men allied and militarily held off the orcs, and it was good for both sides. The dwarves gave the armor and weapons, and the humans provided the manpower. And it was in this War of Elves and Sauron, when there were so many losses on both sides, the whole countryside was ravaged, this alliance kind of fell apart just because the numbers weren't there anymore. But for several years, dwarves and men had a really strong alliance in that region.
Absolutely, and this is the kind of thing that I'm quite a dwarf apologist. The dwarves often get a bad rep, but actually, when you look at them, they seem to be quite open with having good relations with whoever they happen to be near. They have good trading relations with Celebrimbor when they were there. With the elves, they have good relationship with the Lonely Mountain. They build up a really good relationship with the humans that are around them there. So actually, yeah, this is part of what the dwarves are like. Let's talk about hobbits though quickly. Hobbits in the Second Age. This is something which is it was a couple of months or so ago now, but I just quite like your take on this one as well. So we don't need spoilers on this, but one thing which was as a semi-official thing, Lenny Henry is very well known here in the UK. He's an actor who is going to be in The Lord of the Rings. He said that he is going to be playing a half-foot hobbit in this. Now, that obviously led to a lot of people going, Second Age hobbits? What's your take on this? Do you think there were hobbits in the Second Age? Do you agree with the idea that we might see some hobbits?
I do think there were hobbits in the Second Age. They weren't written about, but I think they were probably around. Now, were they in the Shire? No. I think that would be a mistake if they actually showed up in the Shire as it is, in the Third Age. That would be problematic. But we do get like a hint of early hobbits. I don't think Second Age hobbits. There's still probably early Third Age. But when Theoden meets up with Merry and Pippin, he recites this legend that his ancestors had, the Northmen essentially had, about, I think, like Hobbitlan? That's what they called them, like the hole builders. And like there were these little people that could disappear on a whim, and they could imitate bird calls. They were almost like magical creatures, I think they thought of them, that just were very secretive and could just disappear probably into holes, basically. But were probably afraid of outsiders and had this reputation of these little people of the forest. I think that the Northmen didn't. It wasn't a bad connotation. They didn't fear them or anything, but it was like, oh yeah, So the idea that they were existing, I don't know when that would have been. Maybe around the year, I don't know, 1000 or so of the Third Age. If you just take that back a bit, maybe you've got a group of people that are just naturally wary of outsiders, secretive. They live in holes in the ground. And we see some version of proto hobbits that have some similar characteristics that we're going to see later, but they have maybe a different culture at that time in the Second Age. That's what I would. But I think since they're not in the story, are they going to have a major impact on the events of the story? I don't. Maybe they're going to be the witnesses, right? All this stuff is happening around them, and they're just trying to make sure they survive. Perhaps something like that.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I talked about this with Girl Next Gondor last time, a month ago, when we were talking about the First Age, but it came up. And I think I'm with her take that this isn't anti-canon. There's nowhere that Tolkien says the hobbits were not there in the Second Age. So he talks about them emerging in the Third Age, but this is very much along with what I was saying earlier about his writing conceit, that he is a person within the narrative, the meta-narrative, as being a scholar trying to figure out what was going on, rather than him as a kind of a god figure telling us exactly what happened. So I think that's entirely possible. I love your idea about them being observers. I wouldn't, and I have no idea whether this is a good analogy or not, but it did make me think of in certainly the original Star Wars trilogy, the concept for the droids was that they weren't the people who were saving the day or doing anything like that, but they were our gateway in. They were the people who we
like
saw.
The Greek chorus or something.
Exactly, yeah. That we saw the events through their eyes simply by their presence. And I do wonder, maybe that's a way that you could use hobbits in this, because, as you say, they don't have an impact that gets recorded anywhere in the Silmarillion, Book of Lost Tales, or Unfinished Tales, or anything like that. But they don't do anything huge. But maybe they were just there, and maybe because they are our entry point in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, maybe they will be used as an entry point again, just as a possible thought.
Yep.
Reflective rambling. Just saying, you may want to read this rather than speak it. Well, a very kind message from Jack F. Thank you very much. That means a lot to me, actually. Just saying that my channel helps when you're going through a hard time. That it means a lot to me, and it's the kind of thing. And I say this a lot because and I'm sure it's the same for Matt. When you do this, it's just me sitting in front of my computer, and you don't know what impact that may have on anyone else.
So true.
So I have tried specifically to try and create an inclusive community. I've tried very much to be a positive influence, to also to try and help encourage as much as is possible. And if that in some small way can help anyone, then that means a huge amount to me. So thank you for sharing that. It means more than you probably realize. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I get a couple of those occasionally. Obviously, not on the level of your channel, but occasionally somebody will say like, "Hey, you know what?" I had somebody recently say, "I was traveling through Europe, and I felt kind of alone, and then I just turned on your channel, and it felt like you were there talking to me, and I appreciated that. I felt like I wasn't so alone in this moment." I was like, "Oh, just that little thing is really, I don't know, it's really inspiring."
It is. So thank you, Jack. You've helped me back, and that is how these things should go. So thank you. And thank you for saying something. I do appreciate that very, very much. Let's go to a couple of questions. I've got about 3 questions left from my patrons now. So if you've got any more questions, now is the time to drop them into the chat. Canis Lupus Rex saying, did Tolkien write comparatively little about the Second Age because not much happened as compared to the First and Third Ages? What's your view on that, Matt? Do you think he just, or is he not interested in the Second Age as much as he was the First Age?
Well, I mean, it is the longest of the 3 ages in terms of just years. But I feel like he just, his focus for, the bulk of his story, I think, was on Numenor and the rise and fall of Numenor. When it came to the Forging of the Rings, that was also obviously part of his setup for the Lord of the Rings. But yeah, I feel like they're just like, if he'd had the time, I think he would have come back and filled in gaps. But those were the story beats that were really important to him in that moment. Like, this is, this moment from 1600 to 1700, this, and this war of elves and Sauron and the Forging of the Rings and Celebrimbor and Galadriel, and all that's really important to me in this moment, and this is going to help my mythology later. Oh, but now, Numenor, and I want to do this downfall of Numenor, and that's going to help my mythology later as well. I think if you'd given him the time, he would have filled in the gaps, and maybe it's just there were other more compelling stories he wanted to tell from the Third Age and the First Age, and so yes, there are big gaps in what would be kind of the connective tissue, I guess, between the First and Third Age. That's kind of my thought on it.
I mean, I agree. I think he was probably he was most interested in the elves and the sort of the elven mythological history that he has there, and sort of he seemed to get less interested the more it became sort of like about humanity, and just like if you ever read
and dwarves.
Exactly, yeah, and he doesn't care huge amounts about it. He thinks they're important, that they're there, but we don't get all of the huge amount of background. But also with the going back for the third time to this writing conceit that he's in the world, and is therefore sort of like writing about it. We also get the idea that the Silmarillion effectively is a written record that he has discovered, and this is the written record ultimately of the elves.
Yep.
So that explains why the things that the elves weren't really involved in the very early years before the elves came about. Yes, they've got their legends of it, but it's over in a few pages, even though clearly creation and things like that are very important. And then you get what happened on Numenor. They weren't that involved in that. They had other things that were going on. So it's outside of the elf-centric recording narrative that Tolkien established.
Yeah, he was obviously very consumed with telling the story of the Noldor and that first age. Just the tragedy of the Noldor through the first age was something he was obviously very invested in. And then that story got told, essentially. You have some leftover Noldor, and we're learning about them, Galadriel, Celebrimbor. Their stories get told throughout the Second Age, but, most of the Noldor are either dead or went back to the West at that point. And so that story's kind of put a cap on it. But yeah, he obviously was very, very into telling that story of the Noldor.
Yes, I agreed. Lyle Hammock, a question about Numenor, or actually more about the faithful Numenoreans. We talked about this, making Orthanc and the lowest wall of Minas Tirith out of black stone. Do we know how they made this unbreakable stone? I think the annoying answer is Tolkien doesn't tell us, and it is not recorded. But have you got any thoughts on this about how they did it? Was it magical? Is it technological? What's your kind of take on this?
I think there is some reference to magics perhaps being used in some of the crafting, like the daggers of Westerness, for instance, have like some kind of a spell on them that allows Merry to eventually, help defeat the Witch King. So there is potentially the ability to use magics in the creation of objects and perhaps architecture. But it's funny, I actually had one of my commenters was an architect. And so he asked me specifically, hey, are there any examples? What's the most specific architectural design that Tolkien has that I could, that'd be interesting to me? And so the one building that Numenoreans built that I could give this guy was the temple to Morgoth, to Melkor. He's pretty specific about how big it is, how big the dome is, a little bit about the materials. And so this guy broke it down, and he was like, oh, yeah, this kind of reminds me of Roman architecture. And the fact that they live next to this big volcano, essentially, that they probably used, volcanic ash in the making of their masonry. He really got way into this thing. I was like, wow, that's actually really fascinating stuff. But, yeah, as far as, how Orthanc is still impervious to the Ents, thousands of years later, I don't know. That's imagine if every building you built was that way. It'd be you'd have this everlasting society that would impervious to everything. It's fascinating. It does remind me a little bit of, you think about England and say the Dark Ages, the Romans showed up, the Romans left. There was a drop off in technology. But the remnants of the Roman society was still there. So you had the roads, you had the walls, you had this remnant of a civilization that was more technologically advanced still there. And I think that's kind of more the idea that Numenoreans placed this thing on the landscape and then kind of disappeared. But anyway, I don't know. Those are my thoughts on it.
No, I agree with all of them. And Tolkien, I think the Dark Ages is exactly a really good example. Tolkien often talks about Numenor as Atlantis, and sometimes he even refers to it as Numenor Atlantis, to try and show that kind of feeling of this lost great civilization. And to take it across to a Song of Ice and Fire, I do think when you dig into the world there, George R. R. Martin he does so many nods to writers that he loves. He clearly loves Tolkien. There are loads of old structures that are made from black rock. The five forts. There's the wall in Volantis. There's the basement of the the High Tower in Old Town, things like that are made from this kind of fused black rock that people don't know how they were made. They don't know what was there. Clearly, this was some technology or magic or something, but it's gone. It has passed. And this is the feel I think that Tolkien is wanting here, is that this, yes, obviously there was a way of doing this, but that has gone. That has passed. The knowledge has disappeared. And he wants us to have this feeling with Numenor that there was a great thing, but that great thing has gone.
Yeah,
and
sense of loss.
If he told us exactly what it was and all the details, then we wouldn't have that sense of mystery and loss, because we haven't actually lost it. We know what happened. We know what they did. But here, they could do amazing things, and we've no idea how. And that's there. And taking back to the Entwives, incidentally, Tolkien did have this very strong feeling of wanting to show loss. And my personal take as a writer, I think this, and as a human, he wrote very strongly about when he was in the First World War, and he came back and he says, all but one of my friends were dead. And it's like that clearly went into who he was as a person, this idea of just loss. They're not coming back. There's nothing, that's gone. And that lives through his creation here. With the Entwives, this, I think, is, yes, I think you're entirely right about probably what happened to them. But the point that he's trying to make is the loss that's there. We don't know. They don't know. Nobody knows what happened. They're gone. And the Ents are living with loss. And that's a bit of what he's trying to do here with Numenor. It's that same kind of feel, is that there was a good thing, but that's gone. It's lost.
That fading idea too, right? That we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I've got, I think, one more question from my patrons. So as I say, good time to drop things in the chat. I'll try and pick up a couple of questions in the chat after this one. Paul Robbins saying, I've been pondering lately about the destinies of the races after they die. We know that Iluvatar had a special plan for humans, who were the shortest lived. What about the others? Are hobbits in the same boat as humans? What about dwarves? What about the elves? Are they all the same? Is there a division between light and dark type elves? So, Matt, do you want to pick up on this one, on what happens to them when they die?
Sure. Well, you've got this right. The gift, Iluvatar's gift to humanity is this ability to transcend. We were talking about how Aman is outside of the sphere, but this is going outside of this world. We could transcend the world when we die, as opposed to elves, which are kind of bound to the land. They're stuck here, and so yeah, I feel like I did some research on the Hobbits back in the day, and it does seem like the most logical explanation is that they are an offshoot of humans, of the world of men. And so whatever the fate that men have is the same one that hobbits would have. So I think they have that same gift. Now, obviously, it got warped into the doom of men and became something to be feared. Interestingly, man, one of the most, I did a video on this a long time ago, but one of the most evocative, moving passages that Tolkien writes is in the appendices. It's when Aragorn is dying, and Arwen is at his bedside, and they're having this conversation where he's like, "I'm slipping away," and it's like, "Holy, oh, it's not in my eye. I'm sorry, no." But Arwen, in that moment, because she has now made that choice, right? So she's done the half-elven choice thing and decided not to go west. And she says, at this moment, until now, I always saw, I'm paraphrasing, but until now, I always saw Ar-Pharazon as a villain. That they just wanted to go and take over the Valar. But now that I see mortality for what it is, I have more empathy for the choice that they made to try to go and be immortal. I get it. get the idea because this weight is on me now that I didn't know before. Before I experienced it, I didn't have that sense of empathy about it. It's really, really moving stuff. But so there's an elf that is understanding for the first time what it means to be mortal. Anyway, I recommend that passage if you want to go check it out. It's just beautiful, beautiful prose. But for dwarves, I feel like it's similar. There's one little caveat, which is Durin. So you've got these reoccurrences of Durin the first, Durin the second, up through Durin the seventh, whatever. And yeah, it could just be a guy gets born and they decide that's the new Durin, but there's a sense that it's almost like this reincarnation happening, that it's Durin's spirit being brought back. I mean, that's what they believe, at least, that he's being reincarnated and here's our new leader, Durin. It's not like every leader is named Durin. Just every once in a while, several years will go by and they'll be like, no, he's back. So they've got some way of determining that perhaps there is a reincarnation happening. Whether that's true or not, at least it's in their religion. There's this idea of a reincarnation. So those are my thoughts.
No, that's fascinating. I think the Durin thing is, for those who don't know it, yeah. So Durin is one of the founding fathers of the dwarves, and the belief is you get these dwarven kings called Durin. And it is a reincarnation, which is not a very Tolkien-y kind of concept, but it's there in the dwarf's belief. I've just got this other quote from I don't remember where they got it from, probably from the Silmarillion, saying about the dwarf belief in what happens. It was held among the elves in Middle-earth that dying, the dwarves return to the earth and the stone of which they were made. Yet that is not their own belief. For they, the dwarves, say that Aula, the maker, cares for them and gathers them to Mandos in halls set apart, and that he declared to their fathers of old that Iluvatar will hallow them and give them a place among the children in the end. Then their part shall be to serve Aula and to aid him in the remaking of Arda after the last battle. Which I think is a fascinating kind of idea that what they believe that their role is actually not just here in this age, but after the last battle, after the Dagor Dagarath, this kind of the end of it all. They're there to build up the new, and so they are no longer like this second-class citizen that perhaps they might be viewed as being. They are actually the people who are there going to be creating this new wonderful world when it happens. So I quite like that as a sort
awesome.
of a nice little touch to sort of a bit of a hope for the dwarves. Let's dip into that's the last of my questions from my patrons, but just quickly dip into the chat. Andrew K saying, speaking of the Second Age series, I hope it captures the spirit of Tolkien in his universe and does not just make some of the same mistakes many projects do that deviate too greatly. Yeah, you're
agreed.
100% signed up to that. It's the feel, and actually, this is one of the things on Wheel of Time which I liked was that I felt they captured the feel of it. And
nice.
There was a place. I don't know when on the Lord of the Rings movies. I'm sure that you're the same, Matt, when you watched them. And there were some things which I thought that wasn't exactly what was in my mind, but that's so right. You got that. You captured that perfectly well. And for me, there was like Rivendell. That wasn't how I imagined Rivendell at all. But then I saw it and went, oh yeah, that's Rivendell. That's what Rivendell looked. And it's
and
just
the music, boy.
Exactly.
The music
and there is so on the Wheel of Time. Then Shadow Logoth, for those who know it, which is a very sort of evocative place that they go to. I had that same kind of feel, which it wasn't at all how I imagined it. But I went, oh, yeah.
I do have a special thought in my mind, so it'll be interesting, as you just said, that I'll be interested to see if it equates to what I'm thinking it is. Okay, great.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it worked really well for me. Mara Lee, thank you very much, saying this is for a fabulous live stream. Thank you, Robert and Matt, still going strong. Yeah, well, we're nearly there, I think. Child Roland saying, thanks, Matt and Dan.
Great fan of Dork Lords.
And entertaining. Excellent. Let's... the Nerd Far Away saying, I'm dragging my feet about reading The Wheel of Time. Is it worth the time? Go back to the beginning of this live stream. We talk about it for a good 5 or 10 minutes, I think. And Reflective Ramblings saying 2 things. A Wheel of Time dropped 48 minutes ago. Well, there you go. So finish watching this, then go and watch that.
Where are you going?
And you're not allowed to go yet.
The wheel's spinning.
Secondly, I have Matt's YouTube and Twitter. But does he have a Patreon or a coffee or other socials that we should send?
I do not.
Well, you do not.
I do not. I'm a small channel. I think there will be some threshold I hit where I'm like, a Patreon might not be a bad idea. But for now, I do not.
Well, why don't I give, as we're on the subject, where should people go if they thought Dork Lords, love this, I need me some more of that? Where should they be going?
You can find me on Twitter at Matt Rice, MattReiss. And as I say, I have a very small Twitch channel called Dork Lord Prime, and you could check me out there as well. But the primary, I'm pretty good. I think I'm actually pretty responsive to just about anybody that makes a comment on the Dork Lord channel. I respond. So that's kind of where I keep track of my community, is mostly on YouTube.
Excellent news. Well, there we go. And there is a link to the YouTube channel down in the description. As I say, please do go support Matt, support Dork Lords. Go check out some of his videos and subscribe.
That would be great.
Okay, I think with that, I would say next week we're going to be back in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. I think, although I should have checked this beforehand. Be more professional, Robert. I think we're heading into the last bit of my working through time of the sort of the eras of Westeros that we did. The Blackfire rebellions, we did Robert's Rebellion, and I think this time we're going to look at the War of the Five Kings, which is the overarching war which is happening during A Song of Ice and Fire, but we did it. And so this is a matter of trying to sort of pick together actually what happened in that war. How did who won actually manage to win? What was really going on there? So that's what we're going to be looking at next time. I will, Matt, thank you very much for coming on. Hugely appreciate your time. It's very kind. I'm going to make you disappear just so I can point at things.
So be it.
If you like these live streams, if you're watching back a little bit later, then appearing somewhere around here in a moment is going to be a link to more live streams. If you'd like to support this channel, the very best way to do that is by clicking on the link that's going to appear around here to my Patreon. I don't think I've thanked my moderators yet. Moderators, you are amazing. Thank you so much for all that
Thank
you
you.
do.
From me too. Wow, that was great.
Exactly. Take care, everyone. Some fantastic questions. I'll be back at the same time next week. See you again.
Bye, everybody.